Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are ready to rock and roll. You know, Ryan, not doing like post game shows and upon further reviews. It kind of feels like I haven't seen everybody for a while. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
yesterday, I almost wanted to jump into your recruiting show because it's like I hadn't done a show since Friday. I'm not used to taking that many days off, but you guys did a great job yesterday talking recruiting. Today, we're going to talk about the Notre Dame team, and then we're going to dive in and we'll talk about the offense. Tomorrow, we'll talk defense. And of course, after the show, we'll have a mailbag. But I think the offense is a very intriguing topic of conversation right now, Ryan, because honestly, this group is going to look a lot different. And that's just kind of how bowl games are going to be now for a lot of teams moving forward. You know, you're seeing all these opt-outs. I mean, Notre Dame's had some big name opt-outs. The number of opt-outs has not been nearly as great as what South Carolina's gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing this all over the place. Ohio State not having one of their best receivers decided not to play and get healthy and ready for the draft. I mean, this is just the new normal in college football. I don't like it, but it is what it is. Yeah. And then, of course, for Notre Dame, it's unique as well, Ryan, because not just who they're losing, but then who they're getting back. Mm-hmm. And so the reality is Notre Dame can't be the team they were all season. They can't be the team they were all season on offense. They don't have the same personnel. And honestly, it would be a wasted opportunity of 15 practices plus a bowl game to do that. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of what we want to see from the offense and what the expectations should be for the offense heading into the bowl game and what we want to see from them out of the bowl game as they go into next season. Because I truly believe, Ryan, that in a lot of ways, this matchup against South Carolina was a really good one for Notre Dame. It's an SEC opponent. It's, it's somewhat of a name. It's not like a high-level SEC team, but it is an SEC team that had some big wins down the stretch. They're ranked higher than Notre Dame in 2 of the 3 polls that came out, and it's a chance to kind of go out and get a win. But for the Notre Dame offense especially, they weren't winning games this year because of their defense. And so that's a matchup that's favorable to Notre Dame. But I feel like also this is the kind of game that can send this offense into the postseason or into the offseason with a lot of much-needed momentum. And I think when you look at the way the season ended and just sort of let me rephrase, the way the season went offensively with just the constant up and downs, more struggles than successes, and then ending the season the way that they did, couldn't run the football, couldn't make the big plays when they needed it, and ultimately losing to their rival for the first time since 2016, right? Mm-hmm. This team needs some momentum, and I think this game gives them an opportunity to really sort of take that next step and say, hey, look, we're going to go into this offseason with a ton of momentum, and guys are going to sort of say, hey, I'm ready to take this next step, and that's going to be an interesting part of this.
Well, I think it's even more interesting, Brian, because when you talk about what Notre Dame has lost off of the team so far from early declarations and players that are entering the transfer portal, it's not a huge volume, to your point, right? But it is very important football players. And kind of penciling in on offense, we knew that the one identity that Notre Dame stuck to for the majority of the season is, and when we're passing the football, 87's our guy, right? Like we know Michael Mayer is that dude. And the one positive, though, the blessing in disguise, I guess, because, I would have loved to see Michael Mayer one more time. But, of course, we understand the reason for not wanting to play this football game. It makes total sense from Mayer's perspective. But the blessing in disguise is that you kind of get an early glimpse on what does the 2023 version look like? Because it's going to have to look a little different, right? You're not going to be able to – I mean, you're going to have –
better.
Yeah, better.
Whether it has to or not, it needs to.
It needs to, yes.
Sure.
Because you're going to have quality tight ends, but there's not going to be a single entity at tight end that you say that's the guy we're force feeding all the time, right? Your identity is going to be different with guys like Tobias Merriweather in theory, right? Deion Colsey. Your offense is going to look structurally just different, just based upon the personnel that you're going to boast. So you get to keep the positives from the 2022 season, the running backs, the offensive line in almost in its entirety. We'll see what happens with Jared Patterson. But if he does play, then you're going to talk about your full offensive line, talking about your running back crew, you're talking about your young guns at wide receiver, the trees that we've been calling them over the last few weeks. And you really start to get a glimpse into what the identity can possibly look like.
Sure.
So I think it's exciting, man, because it's almost like a reset and a little bit of a preview towards what we can see into the spring, into next fall. into the 2023 season. You're going to see something that's going to look completely different. And I think sometimes different is needed, obviously. And I'm excited to see what it looks like when they face off against South Carolina.
Well, it's certainly going to look different because at the top of this, obviously, is there's going to be no Michael Mayer. And that's a big part of what this offense. I mean, this offense was completely built around Michael Mayer this season, and it should have been. I mean, he was their best player by far on offense, and we're seeing it with all the postseason honors and those type of things. And the tight end position wasn't always the deepest because of injuries, but it was still deep enough to where they felt that that's what they could do. There were limitations of quarterback that the coaching staff clearly felt warranted them to spread the ball out, spread not spread the ball around as much, not to spread things out as much, to focus on being more of a really, really emphasizing the run game, really tight personnel, tight alignments, and pound the football. And that's what they felt they had to be. I don't think that's ultimately who Tommy Rees wants to be, because we haven't seen that from him in 3 years. I doubt in year 3 he finally says, now I get to do what I've always wanted to do, which is just run the ball all the time and throw it 15 times and do those. I just don't think that. I think that's what he felt they needed to do. Now, we could quibble and argue about whether they should or shouldn't have gone that way. That's the direction they went. Well, they don't have that guy anymore. So there is no more Michael Mayer. There is no more best tight end in college football that you can build around now. And then, of course, you say, okay, well, you still have talented tight ends. Well, Eli Raridon's out with an injury. Kevin Bauman's out with an injury. And Kane Barong just announced he's going in the portal yesterday. So you're really down to, as far as we know, now I don't know if they've updated the status of Kevin Bauman, but my understanding was his was a season-ending injury. You're down to 2 healthy tight ends. One of them being a freshman who has one career catch, and the other one is a sophomore with 2 career catches. So I would hope that Tom Rees is smart enough to not say, hey, let's continue to do what we have been doing with Michael Mayer, with Mitchell Evans and Holden Staes. Right. Does that mean that they can't be key parts of the game plan? Not saying that at all. They need to be, because this is always going to be an offense that utilizes the tight ends effectively. But it can't be an offense that says, hey, we're just going to do what we've been doing all year. And I think that's the biggest thing. Before we get into Buckner and some of the other receivers and stuff, the reality is I don't see how Notre Dame could at all look at themselves and say, hey, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, when you consider the fact that they're not going to have Michael Mayer. And we don't know about Jarrett Patterson. We don't know about Josh Lugg. Those guys have not announced that they are not playing in the game. So until they do, I'm going to assume that they are going to play, just for argument's sake, until they say otherwise. But I hope that they play, because I would love to see Tyler Buckner get a chance behind the offensive line being healthy and playing the way it did for most of the season after the Cal game. It really took them till the 4th game, the second half of the 3rd game, before they finally started to show some potential. And then, of course, broke out in game 4 and became one of the better lines in the country, in my opinion, down the stretch. Yep. And I want to see Tyler Buckner behind that. But at the very foundation of it, though, is your identity as a football team this year was very clear. A lot of people say, they don't have an identity. No, they had very much had a very clear. This is one of the most clearly this is what the identity was. And it was more clear this year than it has been for many years. Now, we may not have liked it. Some people may not have liked it. Some people thought they should have done this. I had my concerns and issues that we raised throughout the year. But there was no question about what the identity was. Our objections were more about how you went about carrying out that identity. Was the questions. But you can't live that identity out without Michael Mayer, because he was the perfect complement to the running game and the backs and all those type of things. You could protect the run game with him in ways that, with all due respect to Mitchell Evans and Holden Staes, and if Eli Raridon was healthy, and it would be true for him, it'd be true if Kane Barong was still here. You're not going to be able to replicate what Michael Mayer does, because Michael Mayer is one of the best to ever do it at Notre Dame at that position. Right. And it's not just a plug and play situation. It is, okay, we can't be that team anymore because he's not there. So what is it going to look like? And that's the biggest decision that they're going to have to make heading into this bowl game.
I mean, it's going to be fascinating too, Brian, because we saw a heavy dose of 12 personnel this year, right? We saw a lot of 2 tight end sets. And even outside of Michael Mayer, just the identity of kind of feeding through the passing game to Michael Mayer, with Bauman out, with Kane Barong in the portal now, with Eli Raridon hurts, with only 2 healthy tight ends. And I guess 3 if you want to count David Sherwood.
Right.
You're in a situation.
Kind of more of a fullback than a tight end.
and
That's why we don't
hybrid.
ever mention him in this conversation, because he's more of a fullback H-back than a
Yes.
lining up at attached to the end of the line, blocking 9 techniques.
Exactly. So, I mean, right now with only 2 true tight ends that are healthy in this game, I mean, if you come into this game and say, we're still going to run a lot of 12 personnel, well, I mean, you're one injury away from literally not being able to do that anymore, right? Like, and you're not going to play 2 guys in a large, 100% of the 12 personnel snaps, right? Like, it's just, that's asking a lot of guys that are freshmen, and Mitchell Evans, who became the unquestioned tight end 2 down the course of the season, but even he was a guy that missed a portion of the season to begin with coming off of an injury too. So you're asking you're asking heavy workload on 2 players that one is inexperienced in Holden Stays, a younger player, and then Mitchell Evans that was limited at points early on in the season because of coming off of a preseason injury. So it's asking a lot of those guys just in general. And I think that when you look at this team, it's not fair to them, right? Like, it's not fair to them for one, because that would just be unrealistic expectations. But then 2, can you be an offensive guy, Brian, or can you be a coach and look at that situation and say, I am doing what's best for this offense right now? If that's the nuance that you decide to go in with this game of like, hey, we're just going to keep leaning on the tight ends. Like, you're setting them up for failure. It's just not a realistic expectation that you can put on guys like Stace, like Mitchell Evans right now. Should they be a part of the game plan? To your point, absolutely. And they could be very successful in the roles that you give them. But let's not just act like losing Michael Mayer is not a loss in this football game.
Yeah.
It is. Everyone knows that. Now, to get away from that loss and to take pressure off of it, let's steer into other parts of your team that may be a strength for you. That's where we're going now.
And that's kind of the deal. But before we get there, Ryan, the other part of it is we have to acknowledge, before we kind of get into what the expectations are, we're acknowledging what this offense is going to look like. And another big change, and this would have been true if Michael Mayer was back or not, is Tyler Buckner's most likely going to be the quarterback, barring a physical setback. He's going to be the quarterback. And if Steve Angeli plays, I think this still remains true. And that means that the offense is going to look different. Drew Pine managed the offense the way that he needed to manage the offense. The reality, however, is that he was limited at times in what he could do. There were parts of the game that he just was not good at, or the staff didn't feel comfortable allowing him to really do a whole lot, which we'll dive into here in a little bit. But you've got Tyler Buckner step into the mix, and the biggest question the staff has to discuss is, how much of Tyler Buckner are we going to allow people to see? Now, that's not referring to the snaps standpoint, but part of it's also referring to, Marcus Freeman said in his most press conference, they're not going to allow him to have contact before the bowl game. Mm-hmm. You don't just go out there and do that and then say, well, and we're just going to run the same offense we ran the first 2 games where he was the driving force of the run game. You're not going to see that either. And so what the 2 type of offenses you saw this year from Notre Dame, you can't see in the bowl game. One, because a guy is missing who was the heart of that, if we're being honest. And the other one, because that guy, you cannot ask that kid after the injury he had to come out now, having sped up his recovery process, which was a huge plus, and then throw that off by running him 15 times again, like you did at the beginning of the season. So no matter which offense we're referring to, we can't see that in this bowl game. Now that begs the question, so what version of Tyler Buckner are we going to see? Because the interesting aspect of that is, for all the crap that Tyler Buckner catches from fans, the reality is his supporting cast was not very good in the first 2 games. It wasn't very good for most of the Cal game. When Drew Pine stepped in, it really took this team 4 games to really find its sweet spot. Logan Diggs was coming back from injury. He ended up not even playing against, was it Cal he didn't play against because of just how bad he looked against Marshall? I mean, we were advocating, you need to sit this kid out until he gets his head right, because clearly his shoulder was concerning him. Not that he wasn't playing hard, but like there was the block against Marshall, if you remember, where the guy was coming and he turned all the way around to try to throw his left shoulder or his right shoulder into the kid, because that wasn't the shoulder he hurt. He missed the Cal game, and I think that allowed Logan to kind of get his head right. Mm-hmm. And when he came back out of that missed game against Cal, he was a completely different player than he was the first 2 games. he was different.
Mm-hmm.
Estime started to find his groove. The play calling started to find whatever Tommy Rees felt was comfortable with, even some of it we didn't necessarily always agree with. And then, of course, later in the season, you see Tobias Merriweather step up and start playing more. You see Deion Colsey, who was hurt when Tyler Buckner was playing at the beginning of the year. I mean, they were riding Matt Salerno, in the first couple games as one of the key pass catchers. I mean, they threw two very important passes to Matt Salerno in that Ohio State game. He made a catch on one and then had the offensive penalty. Let me rephrase. He made a great catch on one and then had the offensive pass interference on the other. And so the offense looked completely different in the first two games than it did now. And I want to see sort of how they feel Tyler Buckner has evolved as a player, how the offense has evolved, and see how those two things go together. And that's going to tell us a lot about what this offense is going to look like. I think the big thing for me, however, is I think the first thing that I look at, Ryan, is the one thing we know about Tyler Buckner, there's one for sure thing that we know about him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he can stay healthy the rest of his career. I don't know what kind of passer he's going to turn into. I don't know how well of a leader he's going to be. We haven't seen enough of him. I don't know a lot of things about him. There's one thing I know. Tyler Buckner's a dynamic runner. I know that. I don't need to get that proven again in the bowl game and the risks that come with it for this game. Give him another, 8 months to heal his shoulder between now and August before you really expose him to being that guy again, if you do.
Right.
So I don't need to see that. What I need to see, as Notre Dame looks to the transfer portal for a quarterback to come in and compete with this group, as Kenny Minchie gets ready to arrive next fall, what I need to see is can the run game thrive with Tyler at quarterback with him not being the focal point of it? Need to see that. Mm-hmm. And then number two, can Tyler Buckner manage an offense without having that as part of what he does? Mm-hmm. And those are going to be the keys, because there will be, if Tyler Buckner is ever the guy again at Notre Dame, whether it's 2023, 2024, any other time down the road, because the interesting thing is he got his red shirt back this year. Even with the bowl game, he got his red shirt back that he lost for being the rotation guy last year. So he still has 3 more years after this.
Right.
If he's going to be the guy again, there are going to be teams that can take his legs away. Mm-hmm. And when Ohio State did that, he didn't have a lot to go to. When Marshall kind of did that because of his teammates weren't playing well, he didn't have anything to go to. Mm-hmm. And even as the rest of the unit improves, there's still going to be good enough defenses. Georgia, Ohio State, down the road, Michigan, if they play them, teams that they're going to play in championship settings, they're going to say, hey, we're not letting 12 beat us with his legs. Can Tyler Buckner sit in the pocket and make the decisions with his head and with his arm to say, okay, cool. You want to take that away? I got something for you. That's what we don't know about Tyler Buckner. That's what he didn't show in his role last year, and that's what he didn't get a chance to show in his first 2 games. And because of the lack of time to throw, and then in the few instances where he did have time to throw, had some mistakes that were costly. And so to me, like what expectations, what I want to see from this offense, I want to see Tyler Buckner be given an opportunity to stand there in the pocket and say, I'm going to read this, I'm going to make this decision, I'm going to get the ball out. We have to know going into the spring if he's capable of doing that to any kind of degree. And that's the biggest thing out of this bowl game before we get into specifics, Ryan, is we need to find out what Tyler Buckner is made of as a college quarterback when it comes to sitting in the pocket, making the right decisions, and throwing the ball with the right decision, the right timing, and accurately. Sure. Those are things that we've seen from him in practice, but that doesn't mean a dang thing. We need to see it on Saturdays. And this is going to be, well, technically this is going to be, a Friday? We need to see it on game days, okay? And that's what this bowl game presents him an opportunity to do, Ryan. So that's the biggest thing, is that's going to be a big change and a big dynamic of this game. I highly doubt that Notre Dame's going to say, look, let's just get out of this game. Let's run the ball 13 times and have Tyler hand off all day, and let's get out of it that way. I have to feel like they're going to want to see a little bit of what they have with Tyler, which is why they're starting him in the first place. If they just wanted to run the ball and get out of this game, they would have kept Drew Pine as the starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. I got to think they want to see what Tyler has to offer before the transfer shows up in the spring.
I think that this game for Buckner is two things for me, Brian, because I agree completely. Notre Dame is in a better position to put things around him that were a lot better than they were the first two games. Like we mentioned the offensive line struggles. They weren't able to run the football in the first two football games that Tyler Buckner played. And now you're seeing some of those young wide receivers, the Deion Colesies, the Tobias Merriweathers, start to get more playing time, right? You now see a little more talent on the outside for Notre Dame, along with Jaden Thomas and Lorenzo Styles and those types of guys that we knew coming into the season. But now that you have your running back room running well, now that you have the offensive line playing very well in a lot of spurts of the season throughout the majority of the end of the season, this is a huge opportunity first and foremost for Tyler Buckner. I almost call it this is like a job interview almost, right? I mean, no matter what,
Not almost, Ryan.
Yeah.
Lean into that. That's absolutely what this is.
Yeah.
It's not the end all be all, but it is a very important part of a job interview for the starting quarterback job next season.
And so I want people to understand this. If Tyler Buckner goes out there and throws for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns and they win and he balls out, right? Notre Dame is still going to bring in a grad transfer quarterback because there's a need at the position. You need to strengthen that room with numbers and with talent. You need to continue to do that because we know how important the quarterback position is. But what this is an opportunity to show that Tyler, when things are right around him, he can be a really good football player, and he's starting to take that step into the right direction. Again, we don't know what the future of his injuries is going to be. We don't know what the durability is going to look like. Nobody knows that unless you have a crystal ball. Your law of averages tell you a guy's gotten injured a few times in the past. It's probably likely, but that doesn't mean that's the end all be all, right? But this is a job interview of sorts. Yes,
because we saw that with Drew Tranquill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, remember, Drew Tranquill had 2 devastating season-ending knee injuries early in his career.
That's the same knee, wasn't it? Or was it different?
Both. It was both, different.
Yeah.
He hurt his one knee in 2014, late in the year, and then he hurt the other knee against Georgia Tech, jumping up and celebrating a defensive play in 2015. Yep. Then he comes back in 2016. He's playing safety. 17, he's rover. 18, he plays will. And the only injury he had at that point in time, I believe he hurt his hand against Northwestern, which caused him to miss. No, he hurt himself against Navy, which that's when Drew White stepped in. Remember that game out in San Diego? Drew White got hurt. Drew Tranquill. A lot too many Drews. Drew Tranquill got hurt against Navy in 2018, and then Drew White started, and then Drew Tranquill came in late against Northwestern when Northwestern was coming back. That's the only other time he got hurt. And, he could have played against Northwestern, but they thought they could get out of that game without him. So similar situation, right? It wasn't the same injury twice. It was 2 different knee injuries. Like, well, I don't know if this kid's ever going to be healthy. He ended up being able to be so. So as you said, it's not an end all be all, but we've seen other players have these kind of injuries and they just keep piling up and the kid's just never able to stay healthy.
Exactly.
We've seen both.
Yep. No, we definitely have. And that's a great example of Drew Tranquill for a guy that was able to get past that injury bug. And man, that was still such a great play in that Georgia Tech game on that corner route. It was a fantastic play. It was I felt so bad for the kid, man. I felt so bad. But Brian, I mean, biggest thing, again, it's a little bit of a showing of the resume, right? A job interview of sorts. And the other part of it is, let's be honest, after what Tyler Buckner's been through this year, getting injured in the second game and having a lot of backlash from fans and all those things, kid needs some confidence, right? Like he needs it. This is a game where you can give him some much needed confidence because I think people forget just because of what the results have been so far. Tyler Buckner is a really talented quarterback. He's a really talented kid. There's no doubt. And he's a really good kid as well. So just from a general feeling of it, I hope that he has a great performance because of the obviouses, right? Like I hope he can bounce back and be the great quarterback because he's super talented. But the other side of it is that this is a kid right now that needs a pick-me-up. He needs a confidence boost. And going in now into the offseason, into spring practice, into fall, all those different layers of the offseason, if he is really going to be potentially the guy and compete with whoever you bring in here, whether that is a grad transfer or Kenny Minchie or both coming in, he needs to be a confident player. He needs to. So I think that this is an opportunity not only to show that growth can work and that he can be a really good player when everything is going well around him, he also gets a little bit of his confidence back. Because I feel terrible for Tyler right now that injuries stink, man. Anytime an injury stops development, that is just especially a kid that does it all right, like no one has anything negative to say about Tyler as a person. Like, he's a good kid, good young man, and he's had some bad luck. So I hope, just from the general sense of good morals, I hope that he has a bounce back game. I hope he's able to show everything that he can as a player. And I hope he starts to get his confidence back. Because I think if he starts to get that confidence back and he's able to stay healthy, I still think he could be a really good player. So I hope that this is a confidence boost for him in this football game.
So let's talk about sort of what this offense needs to look like now with Tyler Buckner and is the quarterback. And honestly, I don't think a lot of it. Here's the other point. Because of what we just discussed, what we need to see from Tyler Buckner. Look, I'm not saying they can't call run plays for him. If I'm in a situation where I think this is a heavy crash situation and I want to run read zone, and I've taught him throughout bowl prep, do what you got to do. You get a chance to make one move if there's a guy in the backfield. Other than that, once you get past the line of scrimmage, when contact comes near, you're sliding. Not diving, you're sliding. Right? We've talked about that. If you get near the sideline, maximize your yards and dip out. Don't take a hit, right? Like that. Those are important aspects of it. That's going to look very similar to what I would say the offense should look like if Steve Angeli is a quarterback in this game, right? Because we're going to talk a lot about Tyler Buckner, rightfully so, but what if Tyler has a setback? What if Steve Angeli has a great bowl prep period? I think the offense needs to look very similar, no matter who's a quarterback of those two. If one of those two kids is going to be in the game, or both are going to be in the game, and they're both will be given a chance to go out and see and battle for the starting job in the spring with a transfer, which Notre Dame is pushing hard for, and there's some questions about that we'll get to here in a little bit. But the offense is going to look similar, Ryan. And so we're going to talk a lot about Buckner because that's the anticipation of who we think is going to be starting quarterback. But it is a scenario where if Steve Angeli is the quarterback, these things still hold true, in my opinion, because you're not going to have the quarterback runs. Because Steve Angeli is a good enough athlete where if you're in a 3rd and 2 and they're crashing hard backside, you call, duo or inside zone with a read option, he can pull it and move the chains, right? 100%. He's a good enough athlete to do that. I mean, we saw that at the end of the Blue Gold game when he scrambled for the game-winning touchdown. Was not Steve Angeli throwing the ball. It was Steve Angeli running the ball. Right.
He's also pretty comfortable on the move in general, Brian. Like, I remember the spring practice that we were at when he had to throw on the run. Like, he's pretty comfortable with movement, to be honest. So
we'll see how that kind of plays out. But I think, first of all, run game, I think we need to see a little bit more diversity from the run game. So when we talk about what I want to see from Notre Dame offense in the run game, one of the questions that we had, for the mailbag, Ryan, which I think is applicable here, is it was a question about, why we only see it's from Gideon Rosa. I love tight ends, but not going to lie, I'm tired of 12 and 13 personnel. Why do we never run it out of 11 and 10? Well, Notre Dame does run it out of 11, just not a lot this year. They have run it out of 11 a lot more in the past. Right. It's just the makeup of this team was they felt that they didn't really have the situation of quarterback, the production at receiver to be able to do that. And they felt that the way that they needed to run the ball, they needed to get extra gaps created in the offensive line, which you get out of a second tight end that you don't get out of 11 or 10 personnel. Notre Dame's never been a 10 personnel team, and 10 personnel is definitely not a run alignment you're going to want to see in this game, Ryan, when you're talking about not having your quarterback run, because one of the things that makes running the football out of 10 personnel doable is the read stuff. I can run power read out of it. I can run read zone out of it. I can run quarterback power out of it, quarterback counter out of it, where now my running back. So like next year, if Tyler Buckner's healthy or they have somebody else, a quarterback who's mobile, I can go 10 personnel with Audric Estime and Logan Diggs as my running backs because they're bigger kids and run quarterback counter, with a jet action. I can run quarterback power with those guys. I can do different things like that where, they're serving as lead blockers almost. But you're not going to see that in this game, in my opinion. And they would have to dramatically alter who they are as an offense. They can't run their best play out of 10 personnel. You can't run duo out of 10 personnel, I don't think. Not effectively anyway. you have to be a zone counter team and a read team because you have no gaps. You have no C gaps. It's A and B gaps, and that is it. The C gap is outside. So not going to see out of 10 personnel. 11 personnel, I think you do need to see more runs out of. I think that's something we need to see is more diversity from a formational standpoint. I want to see, some motions and shifts, but I also want to see the tempo pushed a little bit more early on with Buckner especially. Now, not too much because my biggest question with Tyler Buckner is what's his game conditioning going to be like? Sure. That's a big thing that we don't talk a lot about, health and all that, but what kind of legs is he going to have underneath him by the fourth quarter? So when I say push the tempo, I'm not saying you're going, but hey, let's get up, let's get the play called, let's get the movement. A lot like we saw against Clemson.
Yep.
I think those are things, but the bigger thing too, run game wise, is I need to see a lot more diversity of how they attack with the run game. I don't want to see 12 and 13 personnel, duo. Yes, we're going to see duo. It's okay. It's a good run play if used correctly and executed properly and has some balance. I think the reason we saw the inconsistency of the Notre Dame running game this year, and that was one of the more, we'll spend a lot of time breaking this down more specifically in the offseason, Ryan, but just generally speaking, people say, how can Notre Dame run the ball so good one week and so bad the next? So here's what Notre Dame did their last 6 games. They had rushing, actually last 9 games. They had games of 287, 281, 263, 234, 223. And then the other 3 games, it was 150, 90, and 66. It's a really big difference. There's no happy medium, really. The reason why is when teams could take that one thing away, that duo concept away, they had nothing else that they could comfortably turn to because it was very clear that they hadn't repped the other stuff enough to be good at it as a base run. That needs to change in the bowl game, right? Duo is great. Love duo. Fine. Use it. Okay. But we need to see counter used more effectively. We need to see the inside zone used more effectively as a balance and a counter to duo, right? Not just a counter play, the actual counter play, but counter in the small c counter to duo. And we need to see a more effective outside running game, whether it's toss, whether it's outside zone, not stretch, but a pure outside zone, a pure pitch toss, something where you're using Tyler Buckner's legs as a weapon. You kind of fake that pitch and then kind of pull up, or not his legs, but his ability to throw sort of off platform as a weapon, which we've seen from him. We saw this. This was the touchdown pass he threw against Toledo last year, where they were he was either going to pitch it or pull up and throw it over the top, and that's kind of what he did. So we've seen him do that. You can run that you couldn't run before. And if they stay back, then you can still pitch it. But there's things like that we need to see more of, Ryan, where we need to see a much greater diversity of the run game. I don't think, and this ties into the intro, I don't think it would be wise for them to think they can just go into this game and run a million duo plays out of a bunch of different 12 and 13 looks like they did during the season. I think that's a missed opportunity. I think that limits you as an offense. And I think without Michael Mayer, it's not going to look nearly as good as it did. And maybe you can still win the game. I'm not saying you can't win the game, but you're not going to get the type of play out of this offense that you need to really go. Because it's not just about winning. It's important, but it's about really starting to establish who you're going to be in 2023. Because your identity in 2022 is gone. And it's currently, I don't know if it's in Kentucky or if it's already started working out somewhere else, but your identity left when Michael Mayer left. That's okay. That's okay. Now it's time to start saying, okay, what do we think it's going to look like next year? And those are going to be keys.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've been calling for diversity in the run game every single week for the last 8 weeks, right? Even when Notre Dame has run the ball well, I still felt like at times, Brian, I mean, again, we talked about how good the running backs looked this year, during the majority of the season. I mean, Audric Estime just keeps getting better. Logan Diggs was playing great football at the end of the season, kind of really getting back into form after the early injury in the season. We've seen Chris Tyree be effective when used correctly. But honestly, I guess some people will find this like a hot take-ish, I guess, but I don't feel like the running backs were always utilized the best of their ability, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I don't. look, Audric Estime is a great duo runner. There's no doubt. He's a physical downhill kid, duo, power, like all those things make sense for him. But I also don't think that's all he can do, right? And I've talked about this a ton. If I'm a defensive coordinator going against an offense, the more predictable you are, the easier you are to defend. Like that's just point blank period to it, right? So if you're only showing me 1 or 2 run plays all game, you know what I'm going to prepare for? You know what I'm going to be ready for? Like it's basic stuff, guys. It's like if you know what to expect going into a job interview or a day at work or whatever it is, you know how to attack it better. You know your plan of attack. It's basic principles. And I feel like Audric Estime was at times limited because of the diversity. I feel like Logan Diggs at times was limited because of the diversity. Logan Diggs can run duo, sure, but he's also, I mean, he can be a really good zone runner. Like he has that profile where you say he can do a little bit of everything. Chris Tyree, I mean, the speed he has, we don't even need to talk anymore about it, right? Like he's a guy that you want to try to get in space, maybe run some outside zone, stretch at points, like those different things. So I don't think
he's a zone counter guy. I mean, that's the thing in the past. Chris Tyree has had his greatest success as a zone counter guy. Yes. And somebody just made a point, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Bill Walsh said this. He said they use Tyree the same way they use Estime, and that's the problem, right? They use now. I do feel like with Logan Diggs, they started to do more with him late in the year, with the toss, with some of that stuff. But to your point about Estime, it's just like, okay, this is what you do. You're a duo, occasionally a counter guy. Mm-hmm. Now, I think Estime is at his best when he's running tackle to tackle. Okay. However, to your point, when that's all he does, it's a lot easier to kind of have a plan when he's in the game.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, you can't have 3 completely different run games for every kid. Mm-hmm. You need to have your sweet spot. And this, to me, would be the sweet spot for Notre Dame, essentially. Like you're going to have duo, inside zone, counter, a sort of a perimeter quick toss, right? Something quick where the line doesn't need to get out, just a quick toss, whether it's off a read toss or whatever, a jet sweep, stuff like that. Yep. And then there's the schemed up outside stuff, a buck sweep, an outside zone, something like that. Those are the things I think they need to have in this game without the quarterback runs being part of it. And to me, all 3 of your backs that are going to be healthy can run all that stuff. Mm-hmm. The difference when Estime is in the game is your emphasis may be greater here. With Tyree, your emphasis is greater there, and with Diggs, but they all need to run it. But having all of them capable of doing all of it, to your point, Ryan, takes some of that pressure off where Estime has shown he can run for 100 yards against a loaded box. But do you have to do that every time? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? How about you give him some gash runs? And we saw that early. You know, I remember one of the runs he had early in the season was off of an inside, I believe it was off of an inside zone, Ryan, against Carolina, where they had thrown a couple perimeter stuff and had some jet sweeps, and all of a sudden they used Chris Tyree to go in motion, and he does like a swing. The linebacker goes with him, and Estime takes that inside zone, and he's just right up the middle, right? Because you're using other things to sort of take some of that burden off of him of having to run into 9-man boxes. And that's the creativity that we've seen from Tommy Rees in the past that we did not see this year. Right. I believe that it's because of how he felt about the personnel and what they were good at, but also where they were limited, especially a quarterback. Well, he can't use that excuse anymore. Not that he would, but you don't have Mayer as your crutch anymore. And you've got your starting quarterback back. I mean, that's the reality of this, right? We're talking about Tyler Buckner. He's their starting quarterback. He was their starting quarterback. He won it all last offseason. You're getting him back.
Brian, Jimbo Fisher told me that Haynes King was not his starting quarterback anymore. I don't know what you're talking about.
That flipping guy. But the difference is at least in his insane world, Haynes King got beat out. Tyler Buckner didn't get beat out. He got hurt.
Right.
But I don't even think Jimbo would be that. Yeah, never mind. I was going to give him credit. But he may be. But
Brian, can I kind of compare this, though, to like a different facet that maybe people would understand? Like, so what I'm saying here is, yes, there are things that each running back do well that should be kind of their specialized area. But I mean, I quantify it to like what we've talked about with Michael Mayer in the past, right? Michael Mayer could be a short to intermediate guy that's a stick runner, that's an option route runner, and he could do that all day. And he's done that his entirety of his career. But we were calling, even with how great he is, that like, hey, let's get him down the seam a little bit, right? Let's bust the seam occasionally. Let's maybe run a deep over routes. because the more that you show, the more a team has to defend, right? And the more a team has to prepare for. That's all what we're talking about. And that'll make things even more successful and more consistent. I mean, Audric Estime ended up averaging 5.7 or something in that ballpark.
Sure.
Probably averages 6.0 if you don't know what's coming for him, right? Like that's just kind of where it comes down to. So I think diversity and just utilizing every asset of your running game is big, especially if you don't know what you can get from Tyler Buckner as a runner, because that's one hindering factor that you have.
Right. That's where I think using all these guys differently. You know, Chris Tyree only needs 5 or 6 catches, but let him average 8 to 10 runs, but let him average 8 to 10 yards on those runs, right? Because of how you're using him, you know, in the 21 personnel. So that's kind of the run game wise. I do want to see a little bit more diversity. And if your team plays out to where maybe you can run more duo next year, that's fine, because it's always going to be that way to a degree. You're going to go to certain games, say, hey, this team, based on how they play, we're going to use this something else a little bit more this week, right? Or, hey, we don't have so-and-so for this game, so we need to be able to rely on our other stuff. And you didn't just start implementing that other stuff that week because that guy got hurt the week before. It's a part of who you are. And that's kind of, you know, and that's how practice is sometimes. You know, you may counter maybe a big part of your, you know, maybe a base run for you, but there's going to be some weeks you don't really practice it a whole lot because it's not a part of what you're going to do that particular weekend. But you still have it in your back pocket in case the adjustments happen in the game where, you know, hey, look, they're doing something different and we can go to that, but we haven't completely abandoned that. And it's not been a month since we ran it. We're always working on those aspects of it. And I think that's what hurt the offense this year is when teams could kind of take duo away, they didn't have anything else to turn to. And at least decent teams, and Navy did it. Navy's got a very good run defense. USC did it. They don't have a good run defense, but they could just overwhelm Notre Dame's offensive line with numbers. And that's, you know, look, yeah, and I know, Notre Dame beat them with the pass. I get that, but you should still be able to find ways to run the football.
Right.
You know, they did that stuff against Utah, and Utah still found ways to run a football. And how do they do it, Ryan? They got the ball outside. They blocked down and got the ball outside, which is exactly what we said that Notre Dame should have done, right? When they bring those inside pressures, block it down, get outside, you know, with counter trays, with buck sweeps, with things like that.
Pull.
Right. And that's what they did. And I know it's in the Notre Dame offense. We've seen them do it to a degree. But those are different aspects that you need to start seeing a little bit more of as complements to the duo stuff.
Yes.
Right? Because it's like this. If I'm a 3 technique, I know that if they're running a duo, I'm probably getting punched in the face by Blake Fisher and the right guard, right? So I'm bracing for it. And if I'm a linebacker and I see Blake Fisher step down into the B gap, I'm thinking, here comes duo, and I'm coming downhill. Because the read for the back in duo is actually the biggest difference for duo than other runs, in my opinion, is not the blocking scheme. It's the back read. The back's reading the second level. I don't know of any other runs where that's the primary read, that for the back is the second level. And that's the interesting aspect of it. But if I'm that linebacker, I'm thinking, oh, here he comes. But on a buck sweep action, he's stepping down like normal, but he's now pinning you inside, and that guard is now pulling outside. Right? And so it gives a similar action to what you do, but now you're doing something a little different. Or he's thinking duo's coming at you, but in reality, they're running counter at you, and then bam, they're hitting it. Now they did run counter this year, but it's very often weirdly designed. They were actually bringing the tight end from the play side, which was just really bad. It didn't give the same action, and the timing of the backs was not great with counter. It just was a funky play all year for them. They need to get that rolling too. But anyway, diversity of the run game, that's the key. That's something we need to see, and I think that will add to the effectiveness of this offense without having to use Tyler Buckner's legs as a weapon, right? And if Tyler's going to run, it's okay, we just know we're getting the edge on this. You know, it's 3rd and goal, and we know they're bringing everybody and their mother, and Tyler's going to pull it and just walk into the end zone.
Right.
Those would be
times. You got to pick your spots with it. You got to pick your spots.
Exactly. Yep. So you get into the other parts of it, Ryan. And so how do you complement that, right? So if we're talking about, yes, you're going to still have 12 personnel, but they got to see some 11, 21 personnel is a big part of what I want to see this week. I want to see, or this bowl game, I want to see 21 personnel runs. I want to see 11 personnel runs. But those things in the pass game is going to be a big part of it. And I think a smart thing to do in this game is a lot of RPOs for Tyler Buckner. in my opinion. So leave the options there for him to pull the ball, but have them be throws, which we've seen him do. I mean, first play of the game against Ohio State, the 54-yard gain to Styles was a RPO where he pulled the ball and got it out. So I think without really working on his run game, he should have a lot of more time to work on that aspect of it. So I think that's part of it, but it really comes and boils down to not so much RPO specific, but one of the things the staff did not feel great about with Drew Pine, from what I could gather, talking to sources and just watching the film, they did not like him throwing to the perimeter on short game and screen game. They just, for whatever reason, did not feel comfortable. Batted passes. He was kind of late decision maker in those situations. So I think that is something that we saw from Tyler Buckner last year, a decent amount. If you think of the North Carolina game, the USC game, he was pulling and throwing bubble screens and pulling and throwing some of the now screens. And I think he threw a bubble screen to Avery Davis against Carolina for a touchdown, where it was off of an RPO. So it's more about the specifics of the perimeter pass, I think, is something we need to see a lot more of. So what I want to see is that right there. And that's RPOs, that's screen game that are RPOs, right? Those things aren't always together. And I want to see them using the backs a lot more on quick stuff in this game, Ryan. And tell Tyler Buckner, if you hit the top of your drop, your internal clock better say 1, 2, 3, and you're not taking off. You're checking that sucker down, right? And let those backs get in space, something that they just didn't do enough in the fall. So I think that's a big thing for me, Ryan, as you look what I want to see from this offense. There are weapons in place now. We'll get into specific receivers here as we do this, Ryan, with Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey being bigger kids. They're both good blockers. They both blocked very well. Jaden Thomas is a very good blocker during the season.
Yep.
There's enough size plus athleticism with those three on the perimeter that your bubble screens can be effective. Lorenzo Styles started looking more and more comfortable late in the year. Hopefully you can kind of utilize him in some of these type of looks as well. And then, of course, the 21 personnel. I want to see Chris Tyree catch 4 or 5 passes in this game. Whether they're out of the backfield or it's now screens outside, I do not care. I want to see 21 personnel with Chris Tyree catch the ball in the backfield. Those are all different aspects of this offense that I need to see this game where they are Marcus Freeman said at the beginning of the year, before the year, we need to be an offense that threatens teams for the width and length of the field. Notre Dame was a box team this year. They
100%.
rarely threatened people outside of the box. And the furthest they would get is slightly outside the hashes was stuff to Michael Mayer. That was the width that Notre Dame was a threat for teams this year. You've got the personnel, in my opinion, and the guys are healthy, and the quarterback in place, and the running back and Chris Tyree, who will be fresh, who showed in last year's bowl game. If you use him in the pass game, he's pretty flipping good, right? Would you say 6 catches for 110 yards is good in the pass game for running back? I'd say so.
It's decent.
So, to me, Ryan, those are things that if this is going to be your identity, no 12 personnel is everything, is your end all be all. 13 personnel isn't even really much of an option at this point in time. If you're going to run 13 personnel, and I mean this with all due respect to Davis Sherwood, but if you're going to run a lot of 13 personnel with Davis Sherwood on the field for 20 snaps a game and not using your receivers or your second backs on most of those snaps, then you're wasting opportunities to get better and really build and being the team you need to see next year. Doesn't mean there's not a role for him, but it needs to be, they need to be smarter about it and not just regurgitate what they did during the year. They have to force teams to defend the width of the field. They didn't do it this year. They didn't feel comfortable, I think, with Drew Pine being that guy. He was not a comfortable RPO guy for whatever reason. He was not a comfortable perimeter screen guy for whatever reason. He refused to throw checkdowns for whatever reason. Those things need to be put back into what you're doing, because if you can force a defense to defend 53 and a third with Audric Estime and Logan Diggs at running back, your running game is going to be virtually unstoppable. That, or you're going to complete 87% of your passes for 350 yards and because teams just still refuse to get out of the box. Either way, you're going to score a lot of points and be really good. And that's what we need to see. First and foremost with the pass game is the width part has to be a part of what they're doing, Ryan.
Well, I mean, you saw it against USC, Brian. You remember when they did hit a check down against USC to Audric Estime? It went for like 30 yards. Just
Right.
like no one has eyes on him, man. Like it's just been like that too, where it's just if a defense doesn't feel threatened, they're not gonna look at it, right? Like that's just kind of where it is. And I think that it's a tremendous point on your part, the screen game, because we're calling for what are we calling for, folks? We're saying your tight end position, you're losing your best football player for this game, right? Was your best offensive player, bar none. You also don't have depth at tight ends. So personnel wise, let's spread the field a little bit more, right? Let's get a little more 11, a little more 21, those types of things. So naturally, as you get more spread out, you're trying to take advantage of space. You're trying to create space for yourself. Screen game plays right into that conversation. RPO game plays right into that conversation. That's why you're trying to spread teams out. And honestly, Brian, like it's a numbers game, right? At the end of the day, the defense, if Notre Dame does do this and they come out with a ton more 11 personnel, for instance, right? And South Carolina at times is still going to try to sneak an extra guy in the box because they understand that for the entirety of this football season, Notre Dame has been a running football team that wants to make their bread and butter running the football, getting downhill. So they're going to try to sneak that extra player in the box occasionally, which makes your defense unsound. And when it's unsound, throw it out to the numbers, get that quick screen out there, and let guys work in space. We've seen it when Lorenzo Styles is confident and catches the football and he's consistent. He can be a tough guy to corral in space. We've seen what Deion Colsey, Tobias Merriweather have done when they've had opportunities. We've seen in the past what Chris Tyree can do in space. We've even seen Logan Diggs do some great things in space. Notre Dame has some space players, some athletes to work with. If you're going to lighten the box and run a little bit more, less heavy personnel, you have to take advantage of it and you have to play the space game. Notre Dame has the athletes to do it against, by the way, not great defense, South Carolina. I know we're not talking about South Carolina a ton today, but they're not a great team defending the pass in general. So having that type of options, I think, in the passing game for Tyler Buckner will be big for his comfort and will be big because you have the players that I think you can win this football game with.
You know, Ryan, I think the other part of that too is let's talk about those specific players on the perimeter, right? And that is obviously a big one for me is this is the first time we're going to see Tyler Buckner on the field really with Tobias Merriweather and Deion Colsey. You know, we saw a little bit of him with Lorenzo Styles, who he would target, but we haven't really seen him a lot with. We haven't seen him at all with Tobias Merriweather, and we haven't seen him with hardly at all with Deion Colsey as where he was throwing. There was some snaps together last year, but as we've talked about, Tyler was a runner in those games. And so to me, Ryan, when I look at it, I see a situation where I want to see Tyler Buckner get a chance to throw the ball to the big guys. The reality is Tyler Buckner has not proven to be a pinpoint precision passer. He hasn't shown the ball placement that Jack Cohn had, right? Well, what if we said Drew Pine had the same problem? When you've got a 6'4" and a 6'4.5" and a 6'5" kid out there, you don't have to be as pinpoint with your throws. You know, when your small guy is now 6'1", 195-pound Lorenzo Styles, whereas when the season started, Lorenzo Styles was one of their bigger receivers that was in the rotation. Now Jaden Thomas is your third biggest starter, tall-wise, instead of your number one, which is what he was for most of the year. I think that takes a lot of pressure off Tyler Buckner. And one thing that I think Tyler Buckner has shown in his career is he does throw a really pretty deep ball when he's able to throw in rhythm. It's a lot easier to throw in rhythm to big boys than it is to smaller guys who are getting rammed at the line. So I think that's another thing for me, Ryan, is I want to see that those two catching the vertical game as a big part of what Notre Dame is doing in this game, whether it's moving the pocket, throwing action, or just taking shots and throwing it. Because one of the best throws that Tyler Buckner made last year against Virginia Tech was just cover one, hit your third step, let that sucker go to Kevin Austin, bam, perfectly placed on the outside shoulder. His highlight tape is littered with those kind of throws. Mm-hmm. But he wasn't comfortable doing that this year for a lot of reasons. So just let him throw in rhythm. Let him find rhythm. I think Tom Rees is really good, has been in the past, at scheming up pass plays that get quarterbacks in there. We saw it with Jack Cohn second half of the year last year when the offensive line finally gave his quarterback time to throw. Notre Dame ripped people up last year, throwing the football. including a really good Oklahoma State defense. We saw this in 2020. People forget, before all the offensive line injuries set in late in 2020, everybody knows I'm not the biggest Ian Book fan in the world, right? But before that team started having some injuries late in the year on the offensive line, Ian Book was starting to really get hot, really get hot. He threw for 310 yards against Clemson. He threw for 283 against BC, went 20 of 27. He went 23 of 33 for 279 against North Carolina. He threw for 24 of 37 for 285 against Syracuse. And if you remember in that game, Ryan, they had like 3 drop misses, just balls dropped. Joe Wilkins dropped the deep ball. Javon McKinley dropped a touchdown in the sun. You remember that one where he was looking up like this? It was a really sunny day, and he just lost the ball, hit him in the face. He was starting to play. The pass game was starting to play at a really high level because the offensive line was starting to give him time. They were starting to really click offensively. So we have seen, for all the criticism we give Ty Rees, and a lot of it justifiable and understandable, when he's had a team that had weapons on the perimeter and a quarterback that he felt could be a trigger man and get the ball out and be given time with the line, he has put together some pretty prolific passing attacks, really highly efficient pass attacks. Now, they weren't able to always do it in some of the bigger games, which I think is a byproduct of something else, which we can talk about at a later day, or we don't need to because that guy's not here anymore. But we have seen that from Tommy Rees at times. He didn't feel comfortable doing that this year because of the personnel, mainly at quarterback. Mm-hmm. So I think I want to see him look at Tobias and look at Dion and say, with all due respect to Matt Salerno and some of these other guys, that's the future on the outside. Jane Thomas is a guy that you talk about who's going to replace a lot of the production that Michael Mayer brought scheme-wise and route-wise. That's the guy for me in this game that can replace a lot of what Michael Mayer did, the options, the sticks, the drags, the overs. Jaden Thomas is the guy that I'd rather see do some of that stuff as opposed to Holden Stace or Mitchell Evans. Not that I don't want to see those guys get the ball. I do, but it's just a little bit, I don't know if I necessarily want to make them the focal point as much as I do Jaden Thomas. So a lot of Jaden Thomas in the slot, a lot of those big guys outside mixing in with Lorenzo Styles sort of being a jack of all trade, move him around, getting the ball in space kind of guy. I think those are things I want to see, and that's when Tommy Rees is at his best. For all the different things we say, when he has been at his best is when he is spreading the field and getting the ball out quickly and getting the ball in space and then designing some level stuff that allow his guys to get guys free. And I want to see him doing that with Tobias. And I think we're finally going to see Tyler Buckner get a chance to do that with an offensive line that can give him time to throw the football. At least I hope. I hope that's what we see, because that's where I think we could see some fun in this game is getting those guys free and letting Tyler hit some open receivers. And we've seen him do it in bowl games. But the interesting thing is, if you go back to so Tommy Rees has called his first bowl game he called was Iowa State. And if you remember correctly, he took over for that game for Iowa State. Ian Book went 20 of 28, completed 71% of his passes and 247 yards, and they kind of called off the dogs late because they had a big lead over Iowa State. And then in 2020, I thought the Bama game, look, say what you want about the game, but if you go back and break it down, Ryan, you and I have talked about this. There were guys coming open in the pass game in that game because of the scheme. Now, he didn't have time to throw the ball to him. Ian Book didn't make the decision to get the ball where it needed to go at times. And then, of course, last year we saw in the bowl game against Oklahoma State. So this is the kind of environment Tommy Rees, you give him a month to prepare. He's been really creative. I hope that continues in this game. And that's partly why I'm sort of cautiously optimistic and looking forward to this bowl game, is just looking at the history of what Notre Dame's pass offenses look like in the postseason, especially against teams that aren't like Alabama, right? But again, go break down the all-22 of that game. There were dudes coming open in that game. They just didn't get the ball thrown to them. Sound familiar, right? But South Carolina is not Alabama in the pass defense.
They are absolutely not. Brian, you're getting me excited, man, because now I'm envisioning 2 6'4+ guys on the outside. I'm getting like some Reese Stovall, Jeff Samardzija, like nostalgia here for a second, which is just getting me super excited, man, because we've been calling, obviously, for these guys, especially Tobias Merriweather, to get a higher amount of snaps, and probably would have been at a higher rate if not for the concussion, obviously, that cost him a couple football games. But having this clean slate, having the potential to have Tobias across from Deion Colzie, and having those catch radiuses, man. You want to talk about getting a quarterback comfortable, to your point, right? Let's throw to those 2 6'4" plus guys outside the numbers. Let's get those guys involved. I've been able to throw the football down the field in spurts. You talked about obviously the great touch throw last year to Kevin Austin. Let's get some of those going, man. Maybe take a shot early. Let's get the rhythm going because there's option in this passing game. I am very tired, and I'll be completely honest. I'm very tired of the things I see on Twitter and just general media that talk about the lack of talent at wide receiver for Notre Dame. And we've talked about this a ton. I don't think there's a lack of talent at wide receiver at Notre Dame. I don't. Do I think depth hasn't been great over the last couple of years? For sure. No question about that one. But I think there's a lot of teams that if Tobias Merriweather or Deion Colsey type athletes were available, they would chomp at the bit to try to get those guys a part of their football team, right? And I think that Notre Dame has options in this football game. Those guys combined with Jaden Thomas healthy, combined with Lorenzo Styles in the slot and working a little bit outside as well. Notre Dame has options in the passing game. So I really do hope that there's a concerted effort to come out early in this football game. Let's get a one-on-one matchup. Let's take advantage of things. Let's try to get a chunk play. Let's try to get Tyler Buckner comfortable. Because to your point, Brian, the South Carolina defense is not great. They're already down a couple of their best football players, and the defense wasn't that great to begin with. So there's going to be opportunities. I think that you get Tyler Buckner getting going in this game early, get those Twin Towers involved, and just see what you got, man. Like, that's the biggest thing for me is I think there's talent out there. Let's give them an opportunity to succeed and show what they can do. And I'm excited for it because, again, I think Notre Dame has an opportunity to really kind of open up the passing game a little bit more than we've seen this season. Hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. I think that's the big thing. So I'm looking forward to that, Ryan. I'm looking forward to seeing what this pass game is going to look like. I want to see more creativity. I want to see what we've seen in the past from Tommy Rees. That's partly why we were so excited about the season. You know, we looked at Tobias coming as a freshman, and you have Michael Mayer, and you have all these pass catchers in the pass game, and out of the backfield. You know, we knew Logan Diggs can catch the ball in the backfield. We knew Chris Tyree, who had a 100-yard game in the pass game the last time we saw him in action coming out of the season, coming out of last season, basically says, look, man, this is going to be Lorenzo Styles has a 100-yard game to end last season. And there's a lot of excitement about and then of course we saw what we saw. And, look, it's just one of those things where it never materialized for whatever reason. And I want to get back to that. I want to see that. And I think this bowl game presents an opportunity to do that. So, I think those are different aspects of it to me. And again, it all has to revolve around being more multiple with your personnel and being able to look at your team and say, hey, look, this is who you want to be, right? I think that is ultimately who Tom Rees want to be. Like, let's think about this. Let's think about this practically for a second. Let's just say that Tommy Rees wants to be a coach that wants to run 12 and 13 all the time, be a downhill runner, and just run what we saw this season. Let's say that that's who Tommy Rees wanted to be. Why would they be recruiting the class that they are in 2023? Now, we can agree to disagree with him perhaps on maybe they should have done some things differently, and I understand where you're coming from, but even in that spirit, I would have maybe done this or that. We can have all those conversations, right? But what you can't do is tell me that he wants to be that kind of coach when they're recruiting Jade Lamars and Jeremiah Loves, who don't really fit that style. You can't tell me that he wants to be a 12 and 13 personnel, downhill, duo every play guy, and then watch him recruit the receiver class that he's recruiting. There were chances for Notre Dame to go out and get a second tight end in this class. They didn't do so. Why? Why do they emphasize a second back who's a dual threat guy throwing and running instead of a bigger back or a second tight end, right? Why was Kenny Minchie the quarterback they targeted and not a more pro style, big armed guy? And there's plenty out there if what he wants to be is what we saw this season. And that's the point is I know what they did this year. I saw it with my own eyes. I was frustrated by it just like you all were. But it looks so much different than what we saw his first 2 seasons. And it looks so much different from what they're recruiting. There's no other explanation that makes sense to me other than whether you agree or disagree with it, he felt that's what this team needed to do because of the limitations it had at quarterback, because of the lack of depth it had at wide receiver. They were constantly a receiver injury away from just not being able to run their offense out of an 11 personnel team. And so, again, we can all agree to disagree with Coach Rees on how it looked, but I can embrace the fact that that's ultimately who he wants to be based on the type of players he's recruited and what we've seen him from the past 2 years. I can't buy it. The only other explanation is Marcus Freeman is forcing him to do this, and I have zero intel that suggests that to be true either.
Right.
And so I can only come to the conclusion that this is what Tommy and the coaches on offense and Marcus Freeman felt this is the best way with what our team looks like right now with a limited backup quarterback and all these other things. This is how we got to win games. And just, let's not put our defense in a bunch of bad spots. Mm-hmm. I don't think ultimately that's who he wants to be. And that's what I think we're going to see a little bit in this game. With Tyler at quarterback, I think we're going to see a little bit more. It's not going to look like last year's bowl. I hope it doesn't look like last year's bowl game because I want to see them be able to run the football.
Yes.
But I think it's going to look a little bit kind of like what we saw late last season in November, where it's very balanced, attacking down the field. Jack was only throwing 27 passes a game. I'm going to pull up right now, Ryan, because if you remember that late that year, Jack wasn't throwing a million balls like he did in the bowl game. That was a more byproduct of kind of just their complete inability to throw the ball in that game. But if you look down the stretch, starting with USC, his attempts were 28, 24, 29, 20, 20, and 35. And, he completed his lowest completion percentage in that stretch was 66.7 against North Carolina. He was over 70% in every other game.
That's wild.
That's who I believe Tommy Rees wants to be. We saw it in the first half against Navy. We saw it a little bit against USC. And I think that's where I think we're going to see a lot of that more in this game. I think we will see an offense like, oh, okay, that's what we thought this team was going to look like. And they kind of tried to do it in the opener, but they just couldn't protect the quarterback. And I think that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, and it'll be, I don't want to call it a second chance, but like you finally get your offense back to what you thought it was going to look like before the season a little bit, right? Like obviously you were going to count on Michael Mayer, which they did throughout the entirety, but having Tyler back, having the running backs go, and having the offensive line playing how we thought they would be playing going into the season, I think that you now have a offense that was going to look maybe a little more what it was supposed to look like going into the season, which is going to be interesting to see because now it's not backtracking. It's just a different identity from what you had to develop during the season. So you see Tyler Buckner now being able to do some of those things, hopefully the screen game, the RPO game, high percentage throws, bucket throws down the sideline, seeing the running game now going what you thought it was going to be before the season, before your first couple games where you really struggled, having all those elements together. I think Tommy is now going to have a little more at his disposal than what he had, the first 2 games of the season, for instance, what he was anticipating him having at his disposal anyway. So again, I think that my biggest thing about this one, Brian, is although Michael Mayer is not going to be playing, and that's your biggest weapon offensively, you have more options, I think, right now than what you had in the beginning of the season, right? If it wasn't Michael Mayer, and it wasn't Lorenzo Styles, for instance, before this, going into the season, you thought like maybe Braden Lindsey could do something for you, but Jaden Thomas maybe, but he was a wild card. Now you have those twin towers outside. You have Jaden Thomas, who played good football during the stretch of the season. You have Lorenzo that's looked a little more confident the last couple of games, and you have your run game going. So I think that Notre Dame just, in a general sense, offensively, has more options to work with than what they did throughout the majority of the season, at least the beginning of the season. So seeing that, I think, is what's going to give me hope, and hope that you do see more of a Tommy Rees identity, because having those options, I think, is going to allow him for being a lot more efficient in the passing game, which will be tremendous opportunity because, again, folks, I mean, I hinted at this a little bit even to start the show, right? South Carolina is not a great football team defensively, and they have already had a few guys opt out. I mean, Cam Smith, their best cornerback, is not going to be playing in this football game. He opted out for the NFL draft. Zach Pickens just announced, the defensive tackle, that he is not going to be playing this football game as well. Notre Dame is going to have opportunities. There's almost going to be no spot on the field where you don't feel like Notre Dame is going to have an advantage from their offense versus the defense of South Carolina. But it goes way deeper than that. That's why we're talking about this, right? This isn't a South Carolina preview and just of how to beat South Carolina, how to beat the Gamecocks and to win the bowl game and push to 9-4. This goes a lot deeper than just that one game sample size. This is an opportunity for Notre Dame to really push what your identity is going to be moving forward, not what it has been during the season. Because whether you want to admit it or not, the personnel that you now are going to be boasting this season is going to look a lot different than what you anticipated it being early on in the year. So not having a Michael Mayer, having your running back identity, having Tyler Buckner back, having all of those things, I think that you now have a different possibilities moving forward into the spring and into the fall next year. So that's some of the things that we're excited to really kind of dive into and take a look at for this bowl game offensively against South Carolina. We'll talk tomorrow, of course, about the defensive side of the football for Notre Dame. What are things that we can expect moving into that game against the Gamecocks? So that's going to close out this section of the podcast, but please do not go anywhere because as we do every single day, we're going to have a mailbag coming up next. But before that, you can please like this video, share this podcast, hit that notification bell. 5-star reviews are always appreciated, if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. And as always, we appreciate you all for tuning in. But this will end this portion of the Irish Breakdown podcast. All right, we're going to get into some mailbag questions. I know we had a ton here already, and if you guys still have some questions, you want to feel free to start piling them in. Brian will be back momentarily, and we'll keep kind of working through some of these questions here. So first one, we had a super chat from Brock Fonville. Brock, thank you so much for the super chat. Question, how much can Ty Chang off he throws elite. I'm sorry. How much can Tyler change the offense if he throws elite? I mean, elite, Brock. I mean, if Tyler Buckner comes out, he's throwing an elite level, right? A level that we haven't seen from a quarterback this season, but we haven't really seen from Tyler in the past either. I mean, if he's an elite thrower, then I really think the offense is unlimited to how good they can be, right? And I'm not even talking about this one-game sample size again. Going into next season, if Notre Dame is throwing at an elite level, let's say, and elite tells me that you're one of the top 5 teams in college football, right? Like that's elite, right? You have to be right at the top of the kind of that echelon with the run game that Notre Dame has, with the offensive line that you're going to potentially be returning next year. I mean, you are going to have both your star offensive tackles back next year. You're going to have Zeke Correll at center again. And then you're going to have to figure out what the guard situation is. But you're going to potentially have an Andrew Kristofic coming back. You're going to have a Billy Shroud. You're going to have Charles Jagasaw and guys like Sullivan Absher and Sam Pendleton coming in the 2023 recruiting class. So there's going to be options. Rocco Spindler. There's going to be a lot of options. And Ty Chan, which is originally what I thought this question said, are going to be potential options inside a guard for Notre Dame next year. So if Notre Dame is a team that goes from a inconsistent football team throwing the ball to a more well-balanced team, then I don't think that you're going to see a tremendous spike in the efficiency of the offense and the point per game total. I mean, Notre Dame, last time I checked, was around the 31 point per game mark, throughout the later portion of the season. You have to think that number is going to be buoyed tremendously if there's more of a balanced attack because, I mean, let's call it what it is, man. During the course of the season, even when they were playing their best ball against teams like Clemson, for instance, or Syracuse, Notre Dame had an inability to throw the football, obviously, and you still saw that they had some form of offensive success that was built off of the running game. And if you're now able to kind of counterbalance that with a better passing attack or elite passing attack, like this question says, then your offense is unstoppable. Because then you're talking about, oh, wow, we're going to load the box against Notre Dame because we don't want them to get their run game go. We don't want to get Audric Estime, Logan Diggs getting downhill, Chris Tyree working outside, like all those things. But then all of a sudden, your quarterback, whether it is Tyler or whether it is a grad transfer or Kenny Minchie or whoever it ends up being, are kind of dicing you apart, then, I mean, good luck. Wherever you go, the numbers are going to be wrong. So, I mean, if this offense is ever able to get to an elite level, passing attack-wise, then you're talking about endless possibilities, in my opinion. But, Brock, appreciate the question. We're going to move into, and again, keep throwing in those questions. We already have a bunch already, so let's keep working through. Coach Koch's question said, with all these transfers, does that increase the scholarship they can give out? Will those other transfers or high school kids? So, Brian,
well, the thing is, Ryan, they've I can't wait till signing day is over, dude. Everything is good. But it's just, some calls you got to take. But I think they've already accounted for a lot of those. I mean, the reason that we kept saying they were going to get to 27, because we've been saying 27 has been the number for us, Ryan, since the summer. And people are like, I don't know if you can get to that, and I don't know if you can do it, But there was always a level of there's going to be attrition. There's going to be some kids that you're not bringing back. There's going to be some kids that naturally jump in the portal. It happens every year. And one of the frustrations with Brian Kelly was they wouldn't account for the natural attrition that happens. And so they'd always start, by the season started, they're in the 70s scholarship wise, where, last year Notre Dame went real close to, like, they were over 85, like right until fall camp started. And so I think they've already planned. That's one thing where I think we've seen an improvement from the recruiting operation. Mm-hmm. And what you have is you have the coaches that are hesitant to go past numbers because they look at things a certain way. And then you have someone like Chad Bowden and other people in the recruiting office that understand how this thing works. And so there's a healthy sort of push back and forth on the numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think Chad's been able to kind of make it clear that, like, this is the number we need to be shooting for. And then as kids make decisions, then you're okay, we're good to go. Right. And so they've already accounted for a lot of this. And then some of the more attrition that will happen between now and when the portal ends in January, because I think a buddy of mine was like, are you surprised that more kids didn't jump in the portal? I'm like, well, the portal is not closed. He's like, well, I thought, because I think what happened was, Ryan, is everybody thought on day one, everyone that was going to jump in the portal was going to jump in the portal. Right. If you're smart, you're doing some work behind the scenes first before you jump in the portal and don't have a home. And so, and Notre Dame kids are smart. They're savvy kids. They come from savvy families, and more often than not. And so, I think that is why you're not seeing this mass exodus. And honestly, between us, there's all of us, it's our little secret in this chat. There's some kids who have some things they have to get. They would like to come back, but there's some things that they've got to take care of first before they come back. And if they don't, then they'll jump in a portal later. And if they do, then they'll be back. So there's a lot of moving parts in that regard, Ryan. There's still some guys that have 5th and 6th year decisions to make, right? Justin Adamiola has a 6-year decision to make. They are counting on him being back as far as their numbers. If he leaves, then you'd see a spot potentially open up. This is not something, this is no intel. I'm using an example. Let's just say hypothetically a J.D. Bertrand or a Jack Kaiser decided to jump in the portal and go somewhere. Hypothetically, no intel. If it happens a week from now, I'm like, hey, remember when I said this a week ago? I really knew what was going on. It would be a coincidence, 100% coincidence. But let's say they did. That's not a circumstance they are accounting for. That would then open up a spot for someone on the team that maybe they weren't going to have a spot for, or another transfer or something else. And so I think those circumstances are the ones they haven't accounted for. They already accounted for not having they had already kind of given away Michael Mayer's scholarship like a long time ago. There was no thought of him coming back. I don't think they really had any thought of Isaiah Foskey coming back, right? Like Jarrett Patterson technically could come back next year. He's not going to. He's already accepted a Senior Bowl invite, I believe, correct?
Yes.
So, but the point is, that's not a kid they were accounting for coming back. That would involve them saying, hey, boy, we got to find a spot for him now, which would be easy because you'd say, okay, sorry, you're not getting yours, or we're not going to the portal or whatever. They would make it work. But the point is, they've already accounted for him being gone, is the point. And so guys like, I think the only move that right now that I think changed the overall number was Drew Pine.
Yes.
I don't think that's necessarily one they expected, but I think they always knew it was a possibility because that's part of the reason that they told him when they did. Marcus Freeman said this, and I'm glad he said it publicly because we had made this case when it happened is they told him when they did because they did want to tell him before the portal opened up. So if he did want to make this decision, he'd have the ability to do so. Marcus Freeman said this on Saturday, and I was glad he did. He's like, hey, we could have waited. We could have waited until it was too late for him to jump in the portal because, for the bowl game, but we decided to do it the right way, and they did it the right way. Now, Drew may not have liked the decision, right, and the conclusion, but you may argue that the decision was wrong, but you can't argue that the way they did it was wrong, in my opinion.
Agree.
It's the timing of it, the honesty of it. Those are things we all say we want from coaches, right? We want honesty. Be real with kids and then let the kids make the decisions that's best for them. And that's what this Notre Dame staff is doing. And so some of the kids are kind of going through, okay, what is my decision going to be? Well, and then sometimes you have a kid like Kane Barong who they were not accounting for necessarily leaving. But I don't think it necessarily every single specific kid. It's more of we think about 8 kids, for example, or 10 kids are going to leave. And so we're counting that in our numbers for high school kids. And then if certain kids come back you weren't expecting, what it does is it just takes away from your transfer portal numbers. It may take away from some of your 5th-year walk-on numbers, right? And those kind of things. And I think some of the guys leaving, what it does open up is it opens up a chance to bring back Michael Vincent for his 6th year on scholarship. Where maybe before you wouldn't have had room for him, but now you do because of certain things that are happening. So I think it's more so those areas as opposed to high school. I think in high school, they already accounted for taking max of what they thought they were comfortable taking in this class.
Yeah.
You can get to the next one, Ryan. You want to go ahead and cycle through those and then read those, and then we'll kind of go through it.
Yep, sounds good. All right, so we're going to go now to Coach Koch back-to-back. Brian, he said, also, if Matt Salerno declares, does he get a UDFA gig, undrafted free agent gig? What is his role if he stays another year? Which do you think he should do? I mean, do you want me to hit the UDFA part and then talk about what his role would be next? I mean,
let's talk about his role first.
Yes.
It's not so much about declaring. I mean, I believe Matt's a 5th-year senior, right? Wouldn't it be coming back for a 6th year? I believe so. Yeah. I would have no problem bringing Matt Salerno back if you have room for him. None. My only issue would be you can't bring him back in the same role he had this year. That needs to go to younger players. But I think Matt Salerno provides great value, experience, leadership, work ethic, character, a lot of things that are valuable to your football team. He doesn't have the physical talent that the other kids do, but he would give you a buffer in case there is some massive injuries or if someone departs for whatever reason. I think there's no disincentive to bringing him back other than my concern would be that they play him a lot. That's my only concern, but look, Matt Salerno is a kid that is not a hindrance to your football team. He is an aid to your football team. If your starting punter goes down or starting punt returner goes down, he can step in and field a punt. If you have an injured receiver, he can step in and do some things for you. I see no issue bringing him back if he wants to come back because I think he could provide a lot of veteran leadership that they're just not going to have a lot of next year. I mean, if you think about it, Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles, and Deion Coles are going to be the veterans at receiver next year. Those kids don't have a ton of the guy experience. Matt Salerno could provide some of that veteran leadership while the other kids provide the playmaking. I think there's a lot of value to that if they have room and if Matt was interested in it. He would just I would have a very frank conversation of, look, you're probably not going to play as much as you did last year. That doesn't mean your value is any less. Just means your snaps are less. I don't think that kind of value can be dismissed when you consider how young this team is going to be next year, right? I really don't. I don't know if it's going to happen, but that's my opinion on what he should do. And as far as what he should do,
Mhm.
If he can come back for another year and play at Notre Dame and maybe get a second master's or finish a
Yes.
master's or whatever else, that is absolutely what he should do, because what you're about to answer, Ryan, is he's not an NFL football player.
He's not. He's not. I mean, Brian's exactly what I was going to say is that, look, man, if you have enjoyed being a Notre Dame football player and a student at Notre Dame, do it as long as you can if you're Matt Salerno, in my opinion, right? Look, I'm sure he'll give it a shot. I'm sure he'll do some training. I'm sure he'll go to the pro day, do all that type of stuff, right? But the reality is that he's not an incredibly physically gifted football player. And we've talked about that a ton. I don't need to harp on that too much, but I don't think he gets a UDFA opportunity. I mean, I just don't think that's in the cards for him. He's just not an NFL player, and there's no fault at that. You could be a very successful football player for the role that you play for Notre Dame. You can be a very accomplished person from an academic perspective, and you can set yourself up for the rest of your life. But unfortunately, I just don't think NFL is in the cards for Matt Salerno, and it's nothing to be ashamed of, because he's going to be a whole lot more successful than I ever will be, right, with just the education that he has. So it's kind of what we're looking at right now, but, appreciate the question. But I agree, though, Brian. I think that if he can come back and he wants to come back and he can bring some leadership and some of those qualities that you can't really quantify all the time,
Right.
I would be completely open to it if it makes sense.
Yeah. You just have to be honest with him so he knows what he's walking into. So you don't promise him something and then he comes back and you're not giving him that to him. And then all of a sudden he becomes disgruntled, rightfully so, because every player that feels he was lied to should be disgruntled, right?
Mhm.
That's why I transferred after my freshman year, and I started as a true freshman, but I was lied to. I can never trust you. I can never look you in the eye and say, I'm gonna work my tail off. I'm gonna sweat. I'm gonna bleed. I'm gonna make all these sacrifices to play for you who can't even be honest with me. Screw that. So be honest with Matt. Let him know we have room for you. We'd like to bring you back. Here's what your role is going to be, though. We think there's a lot of value in it. You may not find it as valuable, but we think there's a lot of value. Like Michael Vincent coming back, right? He's a long snapper. Okay. But he's a veteran that's bought into what they're trying to do, right? He's really good at his role. There's value to that, even though it's not the sexy returner like a Mike linebacker, a receiver, a running back, or quarterback. Those kind of glue kids are important. Some of them are walk-ons. Some of them are not walk-ons. Some of them are just backups. So they're scholarship kids that have accepted their role and say, hey, I can't help them on the field, but I can help here. It's like Gary Kubiak. Gary Kubiak probably could have left the Broncos in his career and been a starter somewhere, but he saw value in being in that role, and he brought great value, even though he didn't play. And I think that there are kids like that on this football team if they're willing to buy into that role. And I think Matt Salerno could be one of those kids where he may not make a play next year, but you may hear a story late in the year where Jaden Greathouse makes this huge play, and we're asking him after the game about certain things. He's like, huge shout out to Matt Salerno, who just took me under his wing and helped make sure that I knew this offense. And I could see a role like that for Matt Salerno. I really could. Now, he's not helping you win games from what he's physically doing as much as that other part. And I'm telling you, man, as a former coach, if I had a receiver that I could trust to talk to the other receivers when I'm talking to these kids over here, man, you cannot dismiss how important that is and how rare that is. It's just most kids don't want to embrace that role. And that's what makes Matt's situation potentially different. As long as he's not taking away playing time from those older players, that's the only key.
You also need players that love the program too, right, Brian? Like, that's important, man. I feel like we've lost a little bit of that with how easy it is now for players to transfer and just leave, right? And, chasing the bag, as people always say, right? But I mean, I do think that Matt Salerno might be one of those kids that just genuinely loves Notre Dame football, and you need those kids around your program because that exudes out everywhere. So, I agree completely on that one. Wanted to go now to Patrick Bird, who had a question. He said, could a great bowl game out of Buckner keep one of the top quarterbacks from transferring?
I don't think so, Ryan, because I think what the transfer quarterbacks, they already know that Tyler Buckner's a highly ranked kid. They already know that, from what I understand, the staff is being very honest with transfer quarterbacks, that you're not just being handed a job. We've got some pretty talented kids on our roster. You have to compete and beat them out. And so I don't think it will, but here's the thing. If it does, that's a good thing, because what it tells me is that kid's not coming here with the right mindset. Right? Like Jack Cohn was not promised a starting job. Now I think Jack was smart enough to know that I can beat out Drew Pine and a true freshman Tyler Buckner. I think he had enough. But the point is, Jack had the confidence in himself to bet on himself and say, I can beat those guys out and take that job and do some really good stuff with it. Right? And I think if Notre Dame does get a grad transfer or a transfer period, if that guy is concerned about Tyler Buckner having a good game in a bowl game, and that causes him to not want to come, okay, fine. That tells me a lot about you. And do you have the competitive spirit that when we get in the fourth quarter of a playoff game against so-and-so, or we get in the fourth quarter of a home game against Ohio State, or we're on the road and we're trying to beat Clemson in the fourth quarter and Cade Klubnik's dealing, and I need you to deal, do you have that competitive spirit that says, hey, I'm going to do this thing? That would tell me a little something, to be honest with you.
I also think that the outcome of Tyler Buckner, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but whether he throws for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns or he struggles a little bit during this football game, I don't think that like your mission, if you're Notre Dame, is exactly the same. Like you're trying to recruit the best possible quarterback that you can to come in and compete, regardless of what that situation and that outcome is from Tyler Buckner. So I don't think this is like a tiered approach, right? It's not like, oh, if Tyler Buckner does this good, we're going to go after this kid. If he does this good, we're going to go after this kid. Like it's not a tiered approach. I feel like Notre Dame is just, and rightfully so, trying to strengthen a position that is so important and make it a more talented position. So whether it is Tyler Buckner long-term, or it is the transfer quarterback, or it is Kenny Minchie, or whatever, you're just trying to make that quarterback position more talented, right? Like that's kind of the end all be all. So, I mean, to your point, Brian, like we haven't heard anything that would tell us any different, that they are not being honest with the kids that they're recruiting, that this isn't a, your quarterback won from the day you step on campus. You're going to have to come in and earn it. So in that approach, I don't think that your understanding and your mission, if you're Notre Dame, is going to change at all in that respect. So good question though, Patrick.
I did want to bring up a super chat here, Ryan. I did want to bring this up, and I from Tyler Evans says, I want to send prayers to the Mike Leach family.
Yes.
I didn't want to talk about that in the show because I didn't know how to talk about it. And I really felt like it would be, I don't know. Since I don't cover Mississippi State and I've never covered Coach Leach, I kind of felt, how do you bring it up? But Tyler brought it up. And I want to thank you for that. And, of course, praying for Mike Leach's family because it was very sudden. It was not expected. Yeah. But I do want to say that I don't love the air raid, Ryan. I love studying it. But what a fun personality he was, and just a treasure for the game. Just such a different breed of coach than what we're used to. He'll be missed. Yes. He'll be missed. He changed the game in a lot of ways. How Mummy may have introduced us to the air raid, but it's the Mike Leach tree that has impacted college football the way that it has with the air raid.
Well, I mean, two easy things to talk about, Brian, with Mike Leach is, one, he's a pioneer, to your point, right? Like he perfected it. How Mummy may have created it, but the air raid that we know today is Mike Leach. Like that's kind of where everything came from. That's where the tree began. And the other part is that, I mean, here are some of his stuff about marital advice at times. Right. And like post-game interviews was hysterical.
Listen to him explain about why he loves cargo shorts so much. I saw that tweet today.
He's a character,
and yeah. But when he's being serious though. That's the he would be serious in a funny way.
He's genuine. Yeah,
right.
He's genuine.
Right.
Well, I mean, I'll say it like, I'll just say my brief conversation about this, because I tweeted about this a little bit earlier, because I have a similar viewpoint that you do. I didn't know Mike Leach. I never had a conversation with Mike Leach. I never covered Mike Leach. Like I have no connection with Mike Leach at all. But this one really hit me hard this morning for some reason. It did, because I mean, obviously, like it was very sudden for one, right? Like it's kind of shock. And I mean, the guy was 61 years old. So you never want anyone to lose a family member at such a young age. Like it just should not be a thing, right? But also, I don't know if it's because it's close to the holidays or we're expecting another child or whatever it is, but I just started thinking about his family, and just how difficult it is, especially at this time of year. Like, it's difficult at any point in the
Right.
year to lose a family member, but especially close to the holidays, so sudden. I don't know why, but it really got me sad this morning. It truly did. It was, man, it's just gut wrenching. I just feel so bad for the Leach family, for everyone that got to know him. I mean, you're seeing the outpouring on Twitter of people that got an opportunity to coach with him or just know him generally. And he was a good guy, right? Like, he was a good person for the game.
From everyone that I've ever talked to that did meet him, did know him, because sometimes you'll see a coach and the public persona is not who he is behind the scenes.
Right. Yep.
But talking to people that I know in the profession over the years, they're like, no, that's genuine. Like, that's why people like him so much. Cause like, there is no public Mike Leach and private Mike Leach. There's just Mike Leach. And that realness is something that people appreciate and respect. And I think that's, we need more guys like that, right? Now, not with his quirkiness. I mean, just because be yourself, right? Like, that's just who he was. It wasn't like an act. That's just who he was. He's a different kind of cat. I mean, guy didn't play college football, got a law degree before he got into coaching, right? Just loved the game.
Wild, man.
But it's sad for the game. It is. And more importantly, this is a sport. We love this sport. It's our livelihood, but he was not just the head football coach at the University of Mississippi State University, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was also a husband.
Yes.
He was somebody's husband. He was a father.
Yes.
He was, most likely an uncle, a son, and that's the stuff that matters more and 12 days before Christmas, and unexpected, all of it. It's sad. And so let's enjoy Mike Leach, the coach, but also to Tyler's point, which I love Tyler, because that's who we are at Irish Breakdown, is let's make sure that tonight, and not just be those people that say, oh yeah, I'm going to pray for you. This is a bad habit I have. People say, hey, I need prayer. Oh yeah, I'll pray for you. And then I don't actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
But that we actually follow through, because that's a hurting family right now.
Sure is.
They didn't have a 8-month battle with cancer to brace themselves for this. Mm-hmm. This happened suddenly, and they're hurting, and they could certainly use prayer for everyone. If you appreciated Mike Leach and what he did, then lift his family up today when you spend your time with God, and I will certainly do the same. And Tyler, thank you for bringing that up, because I honestly had no clue how to bring that into today's show. I had no idea how to do that. And so I just wasn't, because it would have seemed, I don't know. Like, it's like when Lewis Nix passed away, I had a hard time with that, writing that story, because we make money off stories.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't feel right. So what I did was I didn't put a video in there. I turned off the ad revenue and all that, because it felt dirty.
Yeah.
Profiting off of someone's loss.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the struggle that I had bringing that into today's show myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I appreciate, Tyler, you bringing it up, but also bringing it up the way that you did, which is lifting his family up in prayer, man. I really, really, really appreciate that, man. Very, very, very much.
Mm-hmm.
And also what makes it hard is the transitions to other things, right?
I know.
Tavis McKay says, thoughts on the new tight end depth chart for next year? I mean, obviously, the only thing that really impacts it is the loss of Kane Barong impacts it. But as long as everybody's healthy, they should still be okay. I mean, you're going to have Mitchell Evans will be back to being healthy. Holden Stace. I imagine Kevin Bauman will be healthy by next fall. Eli Raridan's the wild card, right? I don't know when he's going to be healthy with that knee injury again. I hope that they really take their time with him. But I do think Cooper Flanagan is not a kid that we talk a lot about in the 2023 class, because he's a tight end. He doesn't catch the ball a ton in high school. Mm-hmm. He's not a real socially engaged kid. He's not tweeting all the time. He's not, he's doing it. He's not taking a million trips to other schools. We have to talk about him all the time. He's taken for granted in this class. But I'll say this, Ryan, and I'll kick it to you with this.
Mhm.
I'll say what I think, and then if you can either agree or disagree or ask me further explanation.
Mhm.
He to me is one of the 5 to 8 kids that to me physically is most ready to play as a true freshman.
Oh
And
yeah.
so if there is a need for him, and then you combine that with playing against big time competition, I think Cooper Flanagan signing with Notre Dame is going to be a big part of that, solidifying that depth chart until it gets fully healthy, because I think there's a chance he is the best blocker they have by the end of fall camp. Those are
Uh,
my 3 comments that I'll make about Cooper Flanagan and see
it,
kind of what you think about it.
I think that the toughest transition sometimes, Brian, are two things for tight ends. One, it's the blocking game. Shouldn't be much of a difficult transition for Cooper Flanagan because he does a whole lot of it at De La Salle. For people that don't watch De La Salle out in Concord, California, like they are a triple option team. They are. They're going to run the ball. I mean, he actually ended up having over 500 yards receiving this year, which was a career high for him, which is a good number. But
It's
I
more
mean,
than Isaiah Foskey had as their tight end, right?
yeah, I mean, I mean, his final stats were like 29 catches for over 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. So he had some production in the passing game considering what offense he plays in. But the two toughest transitions are usually run blocking for tight ends, right? Being able to do that work. I think Cooper's going to be able to come in because, again, he's 6'5 plus 240 plus pounds, and he's a strong kid. Like he's going to be able to compete at least in the run game. And number 2, Brian, is a lot of kids, they come in and the lights are a little too bright early on, right? It's like, oh, big stage. I mean, is there a bigger stage in high school football than playing for the De La Salle Spartans? Like,
There's a freaking movie about your high school, right? So,
exactly. I mean,
right.
and I love that you quantified it like this, right? He is not a social media guy. He is maybe the most respectful kid that I've talked to in this cycle. I mean, every time I talk to him, he's just like, thank you, Mr. Roberts. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I'm just like, you don't have to call me Mr. Roberts. Like, it's all right, man. You can call me Ryan, but it's fine.
You make me feel as old as Brian. This isn't good.
But he's just such a respectful, mature kid that comes from a great program. He's going to be ready to go, right? When he gets here in the spring and he leads into fall camp, he's going to be physically mature and ready to handle the run game responsibilities. And he's going to be mature in the sense that he's already played big time football. He knows what that means. He knows the expectations that come with that. So, I mean, I don't push back at all, Brian, because I expect Cooper Flanagan to compete for, I mean, at worst, some reps as a blocking tight ends in year one. Like, I do expect him to do that. What will the passing game component look like? I mean, that's the question mark right now, right? I mean, he has the talent to do it, but I think that one thing that people shouldn't be concerned about with Cooper Flanagan's transition is blocking. That's one thing that I think we should expect early on in his career.
And it may be needed because I don't like Mitchell Evans is an okay blocker. I mean, he was a guy that I expected to be a little bit more of a pass game threat than a blocking threat. It's just he kind of needed to be the blocker because nobody else could really do it. And because they do have the 2 different positions, Michael, you're not going to put Mayer there because that's a bit limiting on the different moving him around and doing some of those different things, the way that they play the 2 tight end positions. So, you know, there's a chance that if Cooper Flanagan can come in and be that second tight end as a blocker, that might then free you up to maybe then try to use Mitchell Evans in a different role. I don't know how well Mitchell Evans would fit that F position, which kind of goes back to the concern about it. But, you know, maybe you alter how those 2 positions go and you have 2 more traditional guys. And then Mitchell Evans can be more of a pass game threat when you do go 12 personnel. But it's going to be interesting to see. But if you need him to play, I think he could be a guy that could be ready to play and be a good blocker for you. And, you know, play action weapon, much like George Takis was. I mean, that's really the role that I think he fits best, is how Notre Dame used George Takis is how I could see them using Cooper Flanagan even early in his career, especially with the numbers. So I think that's one where I feel a little bit better knowing that he's coming in, because between Evans and Holden Stace, you will have, I believe Davis Sherwood has another year left. I believe
so. Yeah.
So you'd have him for some of the H-back stuff if you need it, the moving around stuff. You're going to get potentially Kevin Bauman back. Raridan will come back at some point in time. And then there's Cooper Flanagan. So I still feel like the numbers are going to be okay. And then, of course, they could always go the transfer portal route. You know, like there's a couple tight ends on the market right now, right? We won't get into names, but there's a couple tight ends on the roster. They're like, that dude steps on campus and he's your best player the minute he steps foot on campus. You know, and maybe that's a position where they could attract somebody, you know, because of, I mean, it's kind of like, if you're a quarterback and Lincoln Riley wants you, it's going to be attractive, right?
Sure.
He's already produced, 3 Heisman Trophy winners and probably going to have 3 number 1 picks, and he hasn't been a coach that long.
I know.
Well, that's kind of how it's like being a tight end in Notre Dame. Like, if you want to be a high draft pick, you may want to think about going to play for Notre Dame, right? Same thing in the offensive line. So, maybe they go that route as well. I would personally be open to the portal with all the injuries.
I would be too.
I just don't know. I hope he proves me wrong. I do, because I like Mitchell Evans. He seems like a good kid. I had a chance to meet his family last year after the Virginia Tech game. Super nice people, like super cool people. But I also got to be honest in my evaluation. I don't see what the Notre Dame. I talked to some Notre Dame folks and some Notre Dame coaches, and they think that he's got day 2 talent, and he may. I just haven't seen that yet. Partly because he's been injured a lot. I mean, he was making the transition from quarterback to receiver or to tight end. Then he got banged up, and we haven't seen a ton of him. I've seen him used a whole lot. I would say he's way ahead of schedule from where I thought he'd be. Mm-hmm. So that leaves me hope that he could become that, but I also can't assume he's going to be that because I haven't seen it yet.
Sure.
And I hope he proves me wrong, but I just haven't seen that yet. And if he is going to be that guy, is it going to be next year, or does he need another year to bridge before he becomes that guy? That's a question that I do not have an answer to, Ryan. So there you go.
All right. So let's go now to Alex Rohr, who said, I would like to see the offense have a complete 4-quarter game. We've seen them dominate in portions of the game, then completely fall flat. We've also seen the scoreless in the first quarter way too many times this season.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. I do.
I didn't really feel like there was much to add to that.
Yes,
I agree.
He nailed it. He nailed it. It's been a frustration all season. Ryan, I'll take over getting questions back up. So
gotcha.
Gideon Rosa, I love tight ends, but not gonna lie. Oh, we did that one earlier.
Mm-hmm.
David Lowe says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is a bowl win for Irish fans? Well, I can't speak for the rest of y'all. Y'all can give your opinion, right? For me, I mean, honestly, I think a bowl, I'm going to go 9. I'm going to reserve 10 for a playoff game or a New Year's 6.
Or national championship.
Right. But it's a 9 for me because of the momentum that I think you can gain from it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's really important to not only win, but I would even say maybe even win convincingly. I mean, a win is you get a win, it's a win, right? But if you can kind of do what you've done in some of your other bowl games against teams that were not really quite on your level, I don't mean that with any disrespect South Carolina, because I would say right now South Carolina is a good football team, finished really strong. They have some ugly losses on their schedule too. Well, so does Notre Dame. They're different. They lost to good teams by big margins. Notre Dame lost to bad teams. So they kind of balance. But I'm looking at it more so of they've just been really hit by guys not playing in the game. Combination of injuries, like Josh Van's not playing because of injury. You've had a lot of guys opting out. This is not a team that should be on Notre Dame's level come the bowl game because of all those departures. And so, and that's no disrespect because I love what Shane Beamer is doing in South Carolina. I mean, I'm a Virginia guy, so he's Frank's kid. I'm rooting for Shane Beamer, right? I mean, I hope he does well. It's a game that Notre Dame should, if they're playing their game, win and win soundly, 10 plus points. But if you do that, Ryan, you really get some big time momentum going into the offseason. It's an SEC win. We've talked about it, but it's more so about not even about beating South Carolina and bragging rights. Your record against the SEC is whatever it is and all that stuff. And because Notre Dame's record against SEC teams not named Bama and Georgia, I think they're undefeated in the last decade, right? I mean, they beat LSU twice. They beat Vanderbilt. I think that's the only 3 we've seen so far, right, in the last decade. I mean, so I'm trying to think. I feel like there's somebody else, but the point is now you go out and beat South Carolina. It's just another SEC team that you get to play and beat. I think those are things you look at and say, hey, that's some bragging rights. But I don't really care about that stuff as much. I care more about the momentum that this team would get going into the offseason. Get their 9th win. Get the stink of the USC game behind you and go into this offseason with some positivity, and especially offensively. So, David, I'd go 9. I can't go 10 because it's not a New Year's 6, a playoff, a title game, that kind of thing. It's not a huge name opponent like an Ohio State, a Clemson, with all due respect to South Carolina. But, you know, you lost to one USC to end the regular season. I'd like to see him beat the other USC to end the whole season. That's what I would like to see. So it's very important to make that happen.
I mean, my needed response was 8 to 9, somewhere in that ballpark, because a lot of the same things you said, Brian. And also I would say that you want to end year one under Marcus Freeman on a high notes, right? Like when you kind of put all those things together, I think it really matters. And I've talked a lot about the recruiting side of this conversation as well. I mean, South Carolina is one of those teams that is utilizing NIL in a completely different way than Notre Dame is. And we've talked about that a ton, right? So I think beating a team like that, I think does have some merit to development over pay for play, right? Like those types of things do matter, I think. So I think when you kind of put all those things together, I think that it is a very important matchup. I would say somewhere between 8 and 9. I would accept either one, honestly. But I do think that it's big for being Marcus Freeman's first year. Obviously, he lost the bowl game last year. If you want to put an asterisk next to that one, you can. But it would also be the first bowl win under Coach Freeman.
Where it's his team,
exactly.
Right? His team, correct.
Yeah. Yep. So you add all those together, I do think that it's very important. There's no doubt about that.
I want to bring this up, Brian. This is great. Gavin Harden says, getting married Saturday, guys. First of all, Gavin, congratulations. Getting married to Angela was one of the best things ever happened to me in my life. You know, and I mean, it's been a wonderful thing. If you find the right lady, was able to convince my fiance our wedding color should be green and gold, even though she doesn't know why. Go Irish. That's great. Now, I didn't even try to convince my wife to do that. But when we walked into the reception, we did play the Notre Dame fight song.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah. So we played our song when we were dating was No One by Alicia Keys. That was kind of our song. And so when we actually got married and introduced, like we played that because you know me, man, I'm not going to have like the traditional wedding song. You know what I mean? Like I got to have something that, you know, is more me and more us. So we played that. But then when we went to the our wedding reception was a place called the Old Barn Out Back. That's literally the name of the place we had our reception. But when we walked in there, they played the Notre Dame fight song. Now, partially because I love it and she loved, you know, but also most of my family and friends that were there are Ohio State fans because it's my family. So I had to have a little bit of that. So we actually faked like a handoff and like threw the bouquet and all that. So she had some fun with it. So that's when you know, I'm like, yeah, I got a winner. She gets me.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm just so impressed by Gavin, though. I can't believe he has that much pull in his relationship.
I know, right?
He picked the
because neither one of us are having any say over the colors of our weddings. That's for darn sure.
You know what's funny is every time Caitlin asks me, like, what color should we paint this wall? I always tell her my opinion, and then she says, does the complete opposite of what I say. Right. So
if you really want to get what you want done, you tell her what you don't want the color to be.
Well, no, I mean, I just started doing this when Caitlin starts to ask me that. I'm like, Caitlin, no, all due respect. And I actually mean that. I don't mean the all due respect as in I'm not listening to you type of all due respect. Right. But, I mean, are we going to do anything that I pick? So let's do what you want, you know? Happy wife, something
like, why are you even asking me? Like, you know you're going to do what you want to do anyway. I don't understand why.
It's the world I live in, man. Now I'm going to be in a house of 3 women and a girl dog. So, I mean, my opinion doesn't matter for anything.
Yeah. Arrow 520 says, Brian, did you get married in Lime, Ohio by chance? I did. So I was actually born in Lime, Ohio, and I lived there through middle school before I moved to Virginia. My mom's whole family lives in Ohio, lives in the Lima, Bluffton, that kind of area. Mm-hmm. So wherever we got married, like her family lives all over. She has like no family like in the same city. My parents and my sister live in Virginia, and my dad's family lives there, but it was more important that my mom's family be at the wedding. And we're like, well, your family's gonna have to travel no matter what. My parents will go wherever they need to go. So we decided to get married in Lima at the church that I kind of grew up going to when I was a kid, my grandma's church. And so, yeah, I did get married in Lima. So we got married in Lima on April 5th. And then we drove down to Cincinnati that night, stayed at a hotel in Cincinnati. And then the next day we went to see the Reds play the Phillies. We walked into the stadium, and as soon as I could see what was happening, like 2 pitches into us getting there, Griffey goes yard, which made me happy because that's my favorite player. And then we made a nice little few-day trip to Denver. And then, so we didn't have a honeymoon at the time. We ended up going on a honeymoon later, which was a train wreck, Barbados train wreck. But anyway, so yeah, that's how. But it's all started in Lima, Ohio. So yes, so people that recognize the old barn out back, that's what gave it away. Rocket 25 with a super chat. IB Nation, please continue thoughts and prayers for Ethan Johnson and family. He is still missing since October 8th.
Ooh.
Yeah, somebody asked about that the other day, like what the status was, and I looked online and I couldn't find anything since like the 14th and the 15th of October when they first announced that he was missing. I haven't found anything, so I guess that's
wild.
Kind of good that there's at least they haven't found a
body.
Yeah,
right.
You hope that maybe he just kind of his mind just maybe broke a little and he just wandered off somewhere. You hope that that's the case, because then he can be found and hopefully helped. So definitely continued prayers for him and his family. It's really scary. Is.
Yeah,
it really, really is. Let's go up here to Gavin KGD. This is a two-part question. It says, how big of an impact would a Gator Bowl win go for this young coaching staff? Would it be similar to the momentum Kelly gained after the Citrus Bowl win in 2017 over LSU? Because post-Citrus Bowl win, it led to 5 straight 10-plus win seasons and 2 playoff appearances. To me, Gavin, it's similar because I feel like momentum is I've said this before, momentum is a real thing. Momentum comes from confidence. Mm-hmm. Confidence is what builds sustainability, and that's what momentum is. It's being able to continue outplaying, out executing, out doing whatever you need to do with a lot of confidence. So momentum is not like this. It's not like the force, right? Like you channel momentum and it goes. No, momentum is a byproduct of something else. I believe momentum is real, but it comes from, in my opinion, confidence. Confidence comes from success. Success then breeds more success. It's something I wholeheartedly believe in when it comes to sports, especially football, since that's the sport I know the most. And so I do think there's a lot of that. Now, where momentum is then tangible is then what do you use that momentum for? How do you get players to buy in more? How do you use, so momentum comes from confidence, but then you use that momentum and the energy that comes from it, Ryan, to get your players to buy. Hey, look, when you do what we tell you to do, this is what happens, right? Good things happen. You use it on the recruiting trail, and then all of a sudden it bleeds and bleeds and bleeds, and now all of a sudden you're winning a lot of games. You can have a right idea and the right things to do as a coach, and you can know all the right buttons to push, but if your players don't buy in, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be successful. Right. That's why you see some coaches win at some places and not at others, because you're not getting the same kind of buy-in at the place that you're going to. The type of kid is different, or sometimes things just don't go your way and you're not able to build that momentum. All those things are all part of it. Having said that, I think that it is big for them. And this is why we talk about it. This is why we said 9. I said 9 earlier, Gavin. Now, again, I said that 9 after Gavin put this question up. But Ryan, I think this is big. They need something that can point to and say, guys, we won. What'd they end up winning? We won 6 of our last 7. Only loss was to a team that was a borderline playoff team in a game where their quarterback had to play out of his mind to beat us, right? Yep. And we were missing this guy, right? We are as good as we say we are. This is validation of that. And that validation leads to buy-in. And then the buy-in leads to more commitment, more listening, less needing to, because there's a lot of kids that needed to, and this is why I think you're seeing some things happen this offseason. They weren't necessarily, the buy-in wasn't there with Coach Freeman that you'd think. They loved him and respected him, but as soon as things didn't go well, Coach Kelly did it this way, and Coach Kelly did it that way, and this is what happens when you have a first-year coach. And Coach Freeman's, you get all that stuff. It's natural, especially when you have coaches that you don't know as well as you did the previous staff. And so, I think it's big for that, Ryan. Really big for that. But it's not the end-all be-all. You also need to start making some decisions with your staff, with recruiting, that better yourself. You can't just be like what we saw in 2015, where Brian Kelly said we just need to coach a little harder, coach a little better, and play a little harder. No, you don't. You have flaws that need to be fixed, and you have to be able to address those flaws. That's the second part of the momentum gaining this offseason, is saying, okay, where were we really good? Where are we not good enough? And what can we do to change those? And it doesn't mean firing coaches all the time. And sometimes it means, hey, we need to figure out a way to do this differently because what we did this year didn't work. I still believe in you as a coach, but we got to do it better. I think that's part of it as well.
And obviously the end result here will go into the record of the 2022 season, and that'll be a part of that whole resume. But I've also kind of separated in my mind a little bit, Brian, without even knowing it, right? Like for me, this is a different entity than just 2022 season. This is a starting point to what this off season is going to look like and what year two is going to kind of transpire afterwards. So I have in my mind that you're going to see a different identity. You're going to see a different football team in some instances. You're going to see some different personnel, obviously. And I think that this is a big opportunity to really get the offseason started right. We've already kind of concluded that whether you're 8-5 or 9-4, it's a failure, right? Like you didn't get to where you wanted to go. You didn't make the playoffs. You're not competing for championships. It's below the standard. But I think that when you kind of separate it and say, okay, 2022 was not a success, but this is the start of 2023 right now. We have a new section of practices that are relegated to this game. We basically have another spring practice kind of built in to leading back into our winter and into our spring. So I think I've kind of separated this in my mind. So for the question of how important it is, Gavin, again, I'll go back to the 8 or 9. I think it's massive because obviously it's going to just be a bowl game at the end of the day, right? But I think that this can be a springboard. I think this can be a propeller. Like this can be a big opportunity to lead into a massive offseason for Coach Freeman, going from full season number 1 to full season number 2. I think this could be a really big momentum builder heading into the offseason. So I've just kind of separated those things in my mind. So I think that's why that's just overall so important to end the year with a W.
Ant VR says, if he does ball out, don't you think the staff will be under a lot of pressure to start Buckner next fall, regardless of how well the transfer plays in spring fall camp? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Look, the only pressure on this staff is to make whatever decisions that need to be made for this team to compete for championship next year. That's the pressure. And if Tyler Buckner gives you that chance, then you roll with it. Tyler Buckner is a very talented kid. That is possible that a transfer could come in and could beat him out. But no, Notre Dame's going to start the guy that gives them the best chance to win now. And that's the thing. Marcus Freeman has to establish very early on in his career that we'll do whatever it takes to compete for championships. This isn't a lifetime achievement award. You're going to be the guy because you put on the blood, sweat, and tears. If there's somebody else that gives us a better chance to win, then we're going to go, whether it's a true freshman, whether it's a transfer, whether it's a younger player that's passed you up, whatever the case may be, this is merit-based. And this is based on who gives us the best chance to compete for a championship. If it's Tyler Buckner, great. If it's a transfer, great. If it's Steve Angeli, great. If it's Kenny Minchie, great. I don't care. It's just whoever gives you the best chance to compete. And again, I don't think one game is going to be a thing that puts pressure on the staff to do anything. Even if he plays poorly. If Tyler Buckner plays poorly in the bowl game and then outplays whoever comes in throughout the spring, throughout the summer, throughout the fall, then he's going to be the starting quarterback next year. If he plays well and the opposite happens, he won't be the starting quarterback next year. You can't make a decision based off such little data, especially when you could say, well, that means he played 3 games. He played okay in 1, Ohio State. I actually think Tyler Buckner played okay that game. It was the only offense they had that game. It's like he played very poorly against Marshall.
Yes.
And if he played great in the bowl game, it's like, well, okay, we still don't know who you are. Right. But I think that's why the bowl game is important, because it's just another little data point that you can kind of learn something about Tyler Buckner. Because I do think if he doesn't play well and all things are equal between him and the transfer, you're going to say, well, this kid's I've seen this other kid play really good football on game days. I haven't seen Tyler do that as the guy. And that could be a thing that separates them. But then if all things are equal and you have this great game from Tyler, say, hey, you know what? He presents a higher ceiling. We saw what this offense can look like when he plays well. Let's go with him. So it's just a data point. It's not going to be a deciding data point unless everything else is like equal. And that rarely happens. That rarely happens. You usually know.
Brian, I mean, let's be honest too about this, right? Like great point on the sample size thing, right? Like there's a situation and a real reality where even if Tyler Buckner balls out, doesn't mean that he's the best quarterback on the roster when the next person comes in, right? Like that's where the competition stuff comes in to the conversation. And I think that that's kind of what Coach Freeman is trying to build from a philosophy perspective, is that he preaches competition all the time. He does. And I don't think that you can go into the fall camp to the spring and then into the fall with one quarterback outplaying the other and just being like, nope, I'm just going to lean into that one game, that one great game that he had as the data point to moving forward. Like, you have to play the best player. So I don't think that it's going to have any pertinence at all. I think it's a nice confidence builder for Tyler Buckner. I think it does make the staff feel better if Tyler Buckner does go into the offseason coming off of a great game, because then you're like, okay, cool. We had some questions on the health side of things, but we now know when we have things right around Tyler Buckner and he is healthy, he can ball out. And then we're bringing in another talented kid that gives us more options. I'm always about the options. I'm always at the end of the day, every position, you're bringing in as much talent as possible because there's no guarantees in football. There's none. Yep. Sometimes guys are going to pan out. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's going to be injury concerns. Sometimes there's going to be off the field stuff. There's a lot of things that can kind of mess up an evaluation. And we've seen that both firsthand in a lot of instances, not even just Notre Dame related. So I think just trying to cover yourself and give yourself options is always the right thing to do.
David Lowe with the question, will all our corners be healthy for the bowl game? They will not, because Cam Hart will not play in the bowl game. I do anticipate everybody else being healthy and being able to play, but Cam Hart will not play. Yep. Mailbag from Gideon Rosa. Are we going to have the Friday free-for-all mailbags in the offseason? Yes. The schedule changes during the season, but they're going to be back sooner than you think, Gideon.
They are. Very soon.
So maybe, well, we'll just tease it out. They'll be back sooner than you think. Christopher Crosby, B. Ryan, now that Kane is in the portal and Eli's injuries, do you think Notre Dame will have to go to the portal for another tight end? I don't think they have to go to the portal for a tight end. Mm-hmm. This is kind of alludes to what we were discussing earlier, Christopher, is I think they will at least be open to it if it's the right guy. Yes. And actually, we've done some digging on this. Mm-hmm. Let's just say this. We do not anticipate Notre Dame going into the portal for depth at tight end. They like the depth. The only way they'd go to the portal is if they find, and this is true at a lot of positions. Mm-hmm. If there's a guy out there that is that dude is the best guy at this position the minute he steps foot on campus, and it's not really close. And sometimes it's because he's got more talent. Sometimes it's the experience where, you may say, boy, I think Holden States can be a star, but he's probably not going to be that till 2024. We need a guy that can kind of be the guy this year, or you may think that about Mitchell Evans. I'm just using examples. Then you say, hey, look, this guy can be our dude day one. And then 2024, Mitchell, Eli, Holden, they can battle it out for that. They'll be in a better position to battle it out for that job. Mitchell will be going to a senior year. Holden and Eli will be going to their junior years, and you feel better about it. Mm-hmm. But it would have to be that kind of guy, I think. Same thing, like I think Viper's that way. I don't think Notre Dame's looking in the portal for just a depth piece at Viper. I don't. I think they're looking for a guy that can be an impact guy, or let's see what we have. Assuming Justin Ademilola comes back. Now, if he leaves, then all bets are off a little bit on that one. But, like linebacker. Is Notre Dame in the portal looking for a linebacker? No. If a dude wanted to come to Notre Dame, would they consider it? Yeah, I think they would. That's just an example. I haven't been given intel on that. That's literally just an example. I feel like I got to clarify that, because then there's people like hear that stuff and I'm like, oh, wow, Driscoll's saying that no. I'm saying hypothetically speaking.
All the linebackers are transferring.
Right. Yes. Like running back. Like, okay, I love Notre Dame's running backs, but if Bijan Robinson was like, you know what, I don't want to go pro. Dream of mine was always play at Notre Dame. You can say, nah, dude, we're good, man. Sorry. You know what I mean? No, you're like, okay, cool. Like, best running back in college football. Sure. We'll give it a shot. Are they looking for a running back in the portal? No, they're good. They have really good running backs.
Yes.
Bill Walsh asks, will we see a trick play by the offense in this game? Probably. You usually see that in bowl games, and I'm okay with it. As long as it's smart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't want a team to get too out of their identity, though, at sometimes, because I feel like you could force that kind of stuff. And honestly, I mean, we'll talk about this a lot more, Bill, leading up to the game, but I think Notre Dame has a lot of clear advantages in this game based upon who's potentially playing for South Carolina and who should be playing for Notre Dame. So I'm not opposed to the occasional trick play. I'm not. I think that creativity is an awesome thing for an offense. I just don't want it to get too cute, which I've had some conversations about maybe things getting too cute at times.
Yeah. I like trick plays as being a part of what you do. I do. And you don't have to do them every game, but look, I like knowing that I don't have to practice a reverse this week.
Right. Yeah.
I want to know that we've done it all year and we feel good about it. Like things like that. Like a toss play where you're running a reverse to Braden Lindsay or Chris. That's a trick play, but that to me that's a smart play. If you see a look that's working for you. So those are the things like what I don't want to see is like a toss reverse.
QB throwback.
Yeah. I don't want to see that. I don't, or pitch where, flea flicker thing. It's like, okay, guys, now you're just getting a little bit too crazy, but
annexation of Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Like, I don't want to see I don't want to see like a halfback pass. I don't love those. Those rarely work.
How about the fumble Ruski where Zeke Correll picks the ball up and runs?
I don't want to see that. I don't see that. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Correll may want to see that. And watch Zeke like stiff arm a dude into the ground. I don't want to see that.
I would love to see that. I would love to see a stiff arm a guy.
Is that even legal anymore? I don't think that's legal anymore.
I think as long as they touch the quarterback's hands first, right?
Well, the fumble Ruski, the way that they did it in the past, I don't think is I don't know. I'm not sure. Megan Kufro asks, just curious, if Tommy would have left with BK, who do you think Coach Freeman would have trusted hired to be his OC? I've always wondered that. Well, I know one guy he would have called would have been Brian Hartline. Mm-hmm. But I think another guy I think Jamarcus Shepard might have been a guy that they would have looked at for that role. Jared Parker would have been a guy that they would have looked at for that role.
Yeah.
So Lance Taylor might have been a guy because remember Lance Taylor was still on the staff, I believe. Lance didn't leave until after Freeman was hired, or am I thinking of McNulty? No, Lance Taylor might have left early.
Did he?
Let me look it up.
I think McNulty definitely left after Lance. If I remember,
he definitely left after. Okay, so Louisville hired Lance Taylor on January 16th. Mm-hmm. So Lance was with Freeman for a while. He may have been a guy that they would have looked at too. I like Lance's mind. I do.
How about him with the Western Michigan head coaching job, man? Good for him.
I hope it goes well. He seemed like a good dude to me. Good football coach.
Western Michigan's one of those teams that in the MAC, like they're kind of a cool team. You know what I mean? Yeah. So as long as he's got things humming, exactly. Because we've seen it. I mean, Tim Lester was good his first couple of years, and obviously we saw what PJ Fleck did over there, right? Yeah. So
Yep, absolutely. All right, next question will be Mark Brown. Would you say that each running back needs to have 70% of the playbook, with each centered on but not limited to plays that utilize their strengths? Playbook, honestly, I think running back is a position where you need to know the entire playbook because your responsibilities are much less than a receiver, for example. You have a lot less route tree. I mean, I'm advocating for 5 to 7 run plays being in your playbook. They should all know all of those.
Sure.
And then there's different route. They should all know all of those. Now, you may not use them all, but I want a running back to know it all. I fully expect that because it's just not the volume. It's one of the reasons we say running back is a position that freshmen can step into a little easier than another position because there isn't as much depth of knowledge that you need for it, right?
More specialization at the position, for sure.
And it's more about your instinct and your talent than needing to know 87 different. Like you could run 50 different pass plays. He's got 4 protection options. No matter how many different pass plays you run, he just needs to know the protection call. That's it.
Yep.
He doesn't need to know the route combinations and all that other stuff. So, and you're a lot of times tagging his check down. Mm-hmm. Domer Buzz says, how much did Tom Rees have to cut back his basic scheme to protect Pine because there was no ready backup, limit long passes, QB runs, etc.? I don't think the concern was as much about limiting him because of the backup quarterback, Ryan. I think he felt that he had to limit it because Drew didn't show him that he could do some things that he felt comfortable doing.
Right.
I think we could maybe disagree with that at times, but I think that was more Drew's limitations as opposed to because they would run Drew. I mean, he would scramble and take off. I don't feel that they did things to protect him. I don't think that, like, for example, Domer Buzz saying, like, limit long passes. Well, why would you limit long passes? Well, greater chance of being back, getting hit, in the back, having to scramble, get hit. I don't think they limited those things. I think they limited those things because they didn't feel comfortable with Drew executing them. 100%. And I think that's more than anything.
Yep.
Different aisle, B. Ryan, do you think they called so much duo this year because they had to break the bad habit from last year where the backs were hesitant dancing around because there weren't holes?
I think that how your offensive line is kind of built. Because we talked about this in the preseason, right, Brian? But Notre Dame's offensive line is massive, right? Like I definitely understand the mindset of like, hey, in a duo concept where we're getting a lot more downhill, we want to be incredibly aggressive, right? Get some double teams and really work up to the second level. Like, I understand it, right? Because you have Joe Alt that's 317, or 316. You have Jared Patterson that was up to 308s. You had Zeke Correll that was up to 308s. You had Josh Lugg who was 317 pounds or something like that. And then you have Blake Fisher who's 326 or 327 in the preseason, right? So you have a massive offensive line. So I understand why the thought process goes to duo. I understand why power, those types of things. Like, I understand why your thought process goes there, because I think that that's your offensive line is suited for that because they're a big group. I just think that there was a little more, like, I think that there wasn't enough steering away from, I think that you were kind of painting players into a box a little bit is like my thing, right? Yes, the offensive line can run duo, they can run power, but they're also good athletes, right? Like Joe Alt and Blake Fisher and those guys, they can run some outside zone. They can run some pin and pull stuff. I just think that there needs to be a little more diversity in the run game, but I understand why the thought process went to duo, went to downhill runs, because you have a couple big backs. You have a really big and physical offensive line. I understand why it went there. I just think that maybe it just got a little too complacent with the run game because there was some success, obviously, at a lot of points.
Well, and to the specific question, I don't think duo is the only concept that you do that with. I mean, inside zone is a play where you want guys getting downhill, making your cuts. You don't want a lot of dancing on inside zone. You don't. It's one cut and go.
Yes.
Get on your track, bam, hit the hole. Mm-hmm. Same with outside zone. None of those are plays that necessarily you want a back to be. I don't want a back hesitant on outside zone. And I don't ever want to back hesitant. It's more of there's a patience involved with letting blocks set up that is a must for running backs. That's true of duo. I mean, you can't get downhill too fast before the read has happened, right? There's a timing mechanism involved in all runs, which is why footwork is so important. And that's what hurt Counter. They never tied up the footwork, the timing mechanisms. Like, so for example, if you go back to the old Power O that Miami ran, they would run a jab step before the back would get downhill because they had to allow the blocking to get set up.
Timing.
The kick out and then the wrap had to get – because if you get downhill too quickly, you're running right into the back of that lineman and you can't make a read off of it. Same thing with inside zone. This is one of the things that I was first taught when I became a running backs coach in 02 at Muhlenberg was how important the footwork was on inside zone. Now, we were an under center team, Ryan, right? So we were running from an eye. But like that, we had an open, cross, plant, go on our inside zone, because if it was just open and go, you were getting downhill too quickly. If you were too slow, if you took an extra step, then you were getting downhill too late. The timing of that, and then not just the open cross, plant, go, but you've got the timing of it, the rhythm of it. You can't be too slow with those 3 steps. You can't be too fast with those 3 steps. Those are things that you repeat because it's a timing mechanism. And so those are all part of it. So I don't think duo is the only call that gets you to do that. I think Ryan's point as far as why they did duo is more important is it fit what they do with the line best. And it's also a play that I think Tommy likes because it's a big NFL play. I think that's the other part of it, if we're being honest.
It's a big NFL play. Yeah.
So I think that's it. And I think he's more influenced by NFL coaches than he is by college coaches, in my opinion.
It's so funny, Brian. Even like 5 to 7 years ago, there was barely a trace of duo in the NFL, and now it's just like what everyone does. Which
NFL
is so
always has and always will be a copycat league.
Yes.
Always. Mickey Butler, Brian, what formation do you want to see? What formation do you want to see when the bowl starts? I don't really care. I'm a believer in multiplicity from a formational standpoint, so I don't really care what they start with. I just want it to be an effective play call. What I would say, Mickey, I care more about is like the volume of certain formations throughout the game. You know, I want to see a nice mix of 2x2 and 3x1. I want to see some healthy empty. I don't know if I would do a ton of empty in this game because that is going to naturally lead to the potential of Tyler Buckner running. But there are going to be some times where it's like, hey, we think we go empty. We can hit this shot. We think we can get an ISO with number 3 against a linebacker. We'll sprint out Buckner in those instances where, you maybe even do like a quad look, so to speak, where you kind of, start off an empty, maybe motion the tight end across and quad, have him reach block and seal that edge and just sprint Tyler out. Then that guy's basically your C-gap blocker in a sprint out type of look. There's a lot of things you can do. I want to see that, Mickey. I'm never a fan. you got to run the ball on play 1, or you got to pass on play 1, or you got to be an 11 or 12 or whatever. Run a play that allows you to get into a nice early rhythm and gain you some good positive yards. And if you think you got a shot to hit them on something on the first play, go for it. We saw that to kick off the 2017 season. I mean, Notre Dame came out. Everybody knew they were going to be a running team. And so what did? They did a play action downfield post corner route to Equanimous St. Brown for almost a 50-yard gain. Quite a way to start the year, right? And if you can do something like that, go for it, right? They hit LSU for a play like that, similar early in the game against them. They took a shot very early in that game as well. So those are things I care more about, is just getting yourself into a nice early rhythm and avoiding a negative. That's the word. That's what I hate. It's like, that's what I thought just funked the Stanford game all up from the very beginning. This coming out and getting that false start, and it just like was funky from then on out, Ryan. Like, it just got them into a weird, just funky. They could never get out of that, the whole thing. And so that's why I say funked it up early. You know what I mean? And I want to see early success. I'm a big believer in early success. Because why? Why, Ryan? Again, it's what we talk about. What is it? It's confidence.
Yes. You
come out early, you have success, it's confidence. And if you have early success, then what happens on the other side of the ball? They start losing confidence. Mm-hmm. That's what it boils down to.
Funked it up. I like that a lot.
Yeah, they funked it up.
Right? I might use that.
And that's not me not wanting to use the S word or the F word. That's a genuine, like, it got you into a funky, got you out of your rhythm, got you into really and you couldn't get out of it, Yeah. Just that's what it means.
I love it. Yeah. Two things that are going to drive Brian crazy: double tight power I, first play of the game, or we can run some triple option. Either.
All right, I'm getting Ryan out of here. Ryan's been put on timeout for talking about the triple option. All right, John A1. Did Lorenzo Styles hit his ceiling at Notre Dame at season start? It was thought he'd be a leader of the wide receiver. No way. Lorenzo Styles has some issues because here's the deal, John. If he hit his ceiling, then he would have looked like he did last year.
Right.
He didn't. He regressed. So it wasn't about ceiling. It was about there was other things going on that caused him to, struggle. Andrew Radford. Which wide receiver ends the bowl game? This is a predict. He's asking for a prediction, Ryan. Which receiver ends the bowl game as the leader in receptions, yards, and targets?
I'm rocking with Deion Colzie, man.
All of them?
Yes,
okay.
All three. I think that this is the Deion Colzie breakouts game. I think it is. We've seen a lot of nice stretches, a lot of really nice impact that he's had during the course of the later stages of the year. And I'll be very honest, in the preseason, I did not give Deion nearly the credit that maybe he could have to be that guy because he was injured. You just kind of weren't hearing a lot about him, right, for those types of reasons. But he's shown me a lot of progress this year. So I think him and Tobias are both going to have an impact in this football game, but give me the Deion Colzie breakout game because I think that he's really starting to ascend to that guy, and I think that he can be that guy.
I like Deion. I'd have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say one thing.
Yes.
Not a prediction, but a wish.
Okay.
Because of how much he sacrificed this year and because of how much he kept his mouth shut and just was the good soldier all season, I would love it if Braden Lindsey had like 3 catches for like 120 yards in the season. I'm not predicting it, Ryan. You made a prediction, and I'm with you on that. I could see that. I could see Deion doing that, especially with Tobias being out of the rotation so much. I could see that happening. I could see Jaden Thomas leading him in catches, Deion leading him in yards, something like that. I would just like to see Braden kind of get some couple big plays in this thing because of just what he did this year. And he would be more prone to having success in this offense based on what we saw last year. But if Lorenzo Styles is going to come back, it wouldn't kill him if he had some kind of positive momentum coming into the season either. But I would hope, just from a pure football building into next year standpoint, taking away my sort of, the
proclivity.
Just like I'm trying to think like, I like seeing kids who do things the right way get rewarded, right? So take out the emotional aspect of it, right? Take the emotion. It's an emotional thing for me to say I want to see Braden Lindsey do that, right? It's not needed. It's not a prediction. It's just I'd love to see that kid end his career on a big note. I would. Take the emotional aspect out of it. To me, I hope it's either Deion or Tobias because why? Because it would most likely mean that the things we're saying we want to see was the whole start of the show, what we want to see from the offense. If Tobias and or Dion are 1, and even more importantly, 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, with maybe Jaden being 2, then that tells me this team is leaning into what we think the strengths of the unit of the team are.
Agree.
And that would be a good sign for me. Ryan, I'll let you answer this one. You've watched him, I have not. Thoughts on Caleb Smith, the Virginia Tech transfer who Notre Dame is looking at in the portal at wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, so he's not a guy that I've watched on the All-22 yet, but I did flip on just some highlights just to kind of see, because I actually have a contact at Virginia Tech that I kind of just touch base with and just ask his opinion. And things that he said to me was that he's extremely long. He's 6'2", 222 pounds. I think when you see the plays that he was able to make for Virginia Tech this year, and I know he's had some injuries in his past, but plays he made were really nice contested catches down the field, some vertically oriented stuff where he's able to kind of manipulate his body and adjust his body in the air, and appears to have really strong hands from that regard. But the things that they told me were he's got incredible length, really good body control, and he's got sneaky speed is how they kind of portrayed it. So he's a little bit faster than maybe you would think a guy that is 6'2", 222 pounds would be. So people at Virginia Tech appear that they were very high on Caleb Smith, and they were wishing him best, which tells me anytime someone tells me that of a player that's transferred, that he was well-liked in that program. And I know he was a captain as well. So I think he's a good football player. I think he's a talented kid, and, we'll see what happens with Notre Dame, obviously with him visiting this weekend.
I want to point out something else about Virginia Tech. That is why I get really nervous when I look at the quarterbacks like Michael Pratt, who I think is incredibly talented. When I hear people talk about Grayson McCall from Coastal Carolina, say, boy, we've seen this before. We've seen guys who aren't very good at Power 5 schools go to the AAC, dominate. Shane Bichelle, Tanner Mordecai, right? Guys like that. And then we've seen like Grant Wells, who was pretty darn good at Marshall, for a couple of years. He was always turnover prone, but very productive. Remained turnover prone and not productive in the ACC.
Yeah. We
saw Cameron Ward put up monster numbers at the FCS level, and he was okay at Washington State. It's like 6.7 yards per attempt. Like the Bailey Zappies are the anomaly, but even him, he didn't go to a Power 5 school. He went to Western Kentucky.
Group 5, yeah.
And so it's a big jump. It really is a big jump. And so when you see the production at some of these spots, you say, boy, I know the production is great, but this hasn't been a common thing where you see kids go from that level. Like the guys that have transferred and been successful, it's Joe Burrow going from Ohio State to LSU, Kyler Murray going from A&M to Oklahoma, right? Jalen Hurts going from Alabama to Oklahoma, Justin Fields going from Georgia to Ohio State. It hasn't been a lot of a kid going from a smaller school to a bigger school. It just hasn't happened a ton. It's happened, but not a ton.
Sure.
Baker Mayfield was another transfer, but he went from Texas Tech to Oklahoma. I just get nervous about those guys that put up big numbers in bad leagues, because we've seen the reverse. We've seen guys who weren't very good at the Power 5 level go to that level and rip it up.
Sure.
And I get nervous about that, Ryan, when I start looking at some of those guys whose film. Boy, there's a lot of good film from Michael Pratt from a skill set standpoint. And if he were to jump in a portal and look at Notre Dame, I'd be thrilled because the talent is obvious. But I just get a little nervous when I look at, well, that's a big jump. And then you look at how he did against, Power 5 teams, and it was mixed results, some good, some not so good. He ripped up Oklahoma, but you struggled against Kansas State, who has a much better defense, right? So I get nervous about that. It's like the Austin Reed kid at Western Kentucky. Oh, look at the numbers. Yeah, but look at the numbers Bailey Zappi put up the year before. They're way better. I don't know. It just makes me a little bit nervous. But I thought of that because, Caleb Smith struggled because the quarterback position was terrible.
Yes, he did.
I was one person who thought it was going to be good this year because I liked what I saw from Grant Wells at Marshall. I was like, hey, if he can just limit the turnovers, this is a pretty good football player. But he couldn't limit the turnovers, and he couldn't make the plays he made in Conference USA.
Yeah, that was rough for Virginia Tech offensively this year, man. It was real tough.
Yeah. And I guess my thing too is if Grayson McCall was that dude, would he be going to Notre Dame or would he be going to the NFL?
Right.
in a pretty
I
weak
also,
quarterback class. That's my thing, Ryan.
we talked a little bit about Grayson McCall yesterday because during the mailbag he made he made the decision to enter the portal, and he's also he comes from a very gimmicky offense too, which makes me even more nervous than maybe a couple other players because you want to talk about different terminologies and different systems. Like going from Coastal Carolina's offense to Notre Dame's would be a crazy shift.
Yeah. Now he's very productive. He doesn't turn the ball over a ton. I mean, he's really good at limiting turnovers. But a lot of it, you've got to be able to figure out what is system driven and what is that guy's talent driven. And I've always felt, Ryan, you know this. You and I had this conversation over the summer. I always felt like Grayson McCall's success was more scheme driven than it was that dude's really talented. And that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
And they run like I said it yesterday, but they run like a bastardized triple option type of look. Like it's very odd, man. Very odd.
Yeah, we shall see. Let's go to the next question as we get closer to wrapping up here. Paul, I want to see 150 rushing yards in the second half after Tyler Buckner throws for 200 in the first half. I could take that, Paul.
Man, if
Tyler
Buckner comes out and throws for 200 plus in the first half, man, they are going to kill South Carolina. Kill them.
Absolutely.
Ugh.
Johnny from the Boot says, Brian and Ryan, apologize if this was covered, but a website reported the offer to Northwestern DN commit Mason Robinson. How hard is Notre Dame pushing, and what are your opinions on his talent? Real quick. So first of all, we mentioned that Notre Dame was not going to really be a player there. They got in way too late. He has already flipped to Penn State. He's already committed to Penn State.
He was in Happy Valley this weekend.
I thought it was yesterday.
Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
But I saw it across the timeline today. So,
and that's what I was told by my sources. They're like, yeah, we offered him, but he's going to Penn State. So if they wanted to get in, they should. To me, I wouldn't have even offered. I just would have. If you got in this late, like, what's the point?
Yeah.
I
didn't really love his film either. I watched him.
He's got a nice burst, Ryan. I think he's got a really good first step, but he's just a little bit awkward athletically. Like his lateral quickness, he gets like off balance real quickly laterally, but he's got a really nice first step. Like they're taking a chance on being able to teach the other parts, but he's got a little bit of just off the line. It's just, that's it though, right? Yes. Like that's what he's got. That's like not a great feel. He's a low floor, high ceiling kid, in my opinion. And I don't know if that necessarily moves the needle for Notre Dame. They need more of a high floor kid. They've got plenty of the low floor, high ceiling kids. It's called Josh Burnham. It's called Aiden Gobyron. It's called Jordan Patelho. They got plenty of that
coming in.
Right. Yeah. They got plenty of that. Bubakar, Traore. Yes. They got plenty of that. They need some high floor guys as well.
Did you see, by the way, did you see Bubakar's picture with Marcus Freeman and Al Golden the other day? My guy is massive, man.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I got sent a picture of Preston Zinter as well.
He's a big kid too, man.
He's grown.
Kid. Yeah,
he's grown. He
might be a Viper.
Taller.
He might be a Viper. Yeah. He might be.
Yeah, but Bubakar, man, Bubakar's gotten
kid,
tall.
Man.
He's gotten tall.
You can see the length even just standing there in like normal clothes and just like yeesh, man.
Yeah,
yeesh.
Real broad shoulders. You're like, wow, this cat. Because Al Washington's like 6'1", 6'2", and he towers him.
Yeah. Same thing with Armel Mukum the other day. I saw his picture. I'm like, my guy is long.
There's bringing in some length, man. Now we will never see pictures of Brendan Vernon because he just doesn't do that. Yeah. But he's another really big kid.
Yes, he is.
Let Manager One. What are your thoughts on Alabama losing so many wide receivers to the transfer portal? There's something amiss there, Ryan, because they are losing dudes that can play.
And the whole offense too. It's not even just wide receivers. Yeah. Like they're losing a lot of offensive linemen too. And
they're losing dudes that can play. I got a feeling that a lot of kids at Bama are coming to have the same appreciation for Bill O'Brien that I have. There's not much of that.
That has to be it, because everyone's sort of saying like, "Oh, is Saban retiring or something like that?" I'm like, no. I think this is a Bill O'Brien thing. That's what I think it is. Yeah,
because it's not like Alabama's even bringing in like this. Oh my gosh, this elite wide receiver core, and these kids are going to come in and take all their jobs. They did that last year, and they're already losing guys from that class. You know, JoJo Early already left.
That's what I was going to say. JoJo left. The Trayshawn Holden kid left, and those kids played a lot. Like, it's not like they were just like the Anderson kid that just transferred. Like he barely played, right? His first year. Those guys, they played, which is crazy. So,
you're talking about, Jalen Hale comes in and the Cole Adams kid, who I think is overrated. I think he's only ranked where he is because he's committed to Bama. I watch that kid's film. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yes.
Like Rivals has him as the number 184 player in the country. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, you're going to have that kid ranked ahead of, like, I watched that kid's film and Caleb Smith film, and it's not even close.
I agree with you on
that.
that.
Close.
I agree with you. I agree.
Not even close.
He's higher rated than Jaden Greathouse, man.
Yeah.
Wild.
By some people, yeah. By some people, he is. It's because it's why he's committed to Alabama. See, if that kid commits to Oklahoma State, he's not even a 4-star. It's true. It's the truth because he's from Oklahoma. He's a nice player. That's it.
His numbers aren't even very impressive, right? Like production-wise.
It's like 5'10". He's quick, but he's not real fast. He doesn't have great numbers. He's not like doing like Ryan Switzer had insane high school highlight film.
Yes.
Like he was like
one of the best punt returners ever. So.
Yes. Like you'd see that kid like, okay, I know that you got to drop his ranking a little bit because, because he's small, but like, that dude had some insane high school film. This kid doesn't even have great high school film. Like you'd expect a kid that small to just be, super electric and lighting people up. Yep. I'm like, bro, like Ryan Switzer was a 3-star recruit, and that kid had way better film coming out of high school than that kid had.
No doubt.
So I did not get that one at all. All right, let's get down to a couple. So I'll get to some team questions, Ryan, while you do that. This might be a Brian Ryan question. Not sure why Brady didn't translate. I thought he was a can't-miss prospect. I think, number one, he's had a little bit of a long release. He wasn't a super accurate quarterback, and he went to the Browns. I really believe for a long time that's where quarterbacks want to die. I really think that's a big part of it. I do. Let's see here. Got to some more as we get out of here. Robert Bishop says, do you guys think Dante Moore will flip to UCLA? I honestly, Robert, don't know. Ryan and I have not followed his recruitment from the standpoint of reaching out to sources. I don't know if he will or won't. I could see it. I mean, it would make sense. And it's one of those flips that you could see happening because of the offseason turnover that happens on staffs. The guy that he wanted to play for, the OC, the quarterback's coach that he really liked and connected with, Kenny Dillingham, left for Arizona State. I think that opened things up a little bit. But, I mean, I think he'd be a nice fit at UCLA. I mean, I'll just say this. Y'all know that I absolutely love Dante Moore's talent. I mean, he to me was my top quarterback in the class. Coming into senior, he will not finish as my number one quarterback because I just have seen too many other red flags. And as much as I love the kid's talent and ability to throw a football, he throws as pretty of a football as anybody in the class. I'll just leave it this way. I'm content and happy with the way it turned out for Notre Dame. I'll just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. And I don't wish ill will on the kid because I think he's a good kid. I think you got to have a little bit. You got to have some stones to be a great quarterback.
No doubt.
And I just question if he has those, in my opinion. So, yeah. Let's see, Ryan. John A1, Ryan, where's the best landing spot for Michael Mayer, Jarrett Patterson, and Isaiah Foskey in the NFL draft? My Panthers need Mayer in so many ways. So he's trying to put Mayer and Tommy Trumbull together. How's Trumbull doing for the Panthers? Is he doing anything?
Not too great. Not too great, unfortunately. John, honestly, that's an interesting one though. The Panthers the problem is the Panthers also need a quarterback. We're running out of time, Ryan. So let's just focus on the things the Panthers don't need. That'll be a lot quicker conversation at this point. Sure would, man. It sure would. I'll say this though. On the other side of Brian Burns, maybe Isaiah Foskey might be pretty fun, if we're being honest, though, for that one. They could always use more offensive. I mean, every team in the NFL could use offensive line help. So I don't even know how you quantify Jared Patterson, right? It's like what NFL team needs a solid interior offensive lineman that could maybe start or at least be a really quality backup to back up multiple positions. I think any NFL team needs that, John, like no hyperbole. For Michael Mayer, I've seen the Arizona Cardinals is one because I know Zach Ertz is kind of banged up a little bit, and the kind of maybe the passing of the mantle would be an interesting one. I've seen the Houston Texans as a team that have been kind of thrown out there with Michael Mayer. So we'll learn a lot more, obviously, as we see what the finalized draft order is going to look like. But I mean, someone asked me this other day, like I think Michael Mayer is going to end up being a top 20-ish player in this class, or top 20 pick in this class. I mean, he's honestly a top 5 to 10 player in this class, but it's is he going to run a fast 40? All like those people, but he's a fantastic player. And there's a lot of teams in the NFL right now that could use a Michael Mayer. I even think of like the Los Angeles Chargers with Justin Herbert as the quarterback. I mean, they've kind of have not really figured it out at the tight end position. So there's a lot of teams I think could use Michael Mayer.
Yeah. Ryan, I don't know if you saw the comment from Mark Brown about the triple option being put in timeout. It's pretty funny. I've checked that one out.
That's awesome.
Jason Smith said, if Ohio State has a poor showing, does Ryan Day's seat heat up some? I think it does, Ryan.
It's up a little bit. Yeah,
I think it does. I think it's already warming up. I mean, well, let's look at it this way. Mm-hmm. Does it get hot from a fan standpoint? Already done. That's already there.
Sure.
They lost to Michigan twice. Fans are already like, nice, So there's already that irrational part of the fan base. The same irrational part of the Ohio State fan base that's similar to the irrational side of the Notre Dame fan base that wanted to fire Marcus Freeman after 2 games, right? Mm-hmm. Like every fan base has that irrational side. Mm-hmm. Take that side out. I don't think Ryan Day is on the hot seat yet. Mm-hmm. I do think a poor showing in the playoff would put him there.
Right.
Like if it looks like the gap is clearly wide, because here's the deal. You could say, okay, they won the playoff game against Ohio State or against Clemson. Great. Blew Clemson out. Mm-hmm. But then you kind of got to look and see, what have they done in their other playoff games since he took over, right? You lost to Clemson in 19 in a close game. And then you beat Clemson in a rematch the next year. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. But then you went out and got blasted by Ohio State or by Alabama. You have now gotten curb stomped twice by Michigan. Mm-hmm. And then you go get smashed by Georgia, because he said poor showing. To me, a poor showing isn't you lose by a field goal reminiscent of 2017 Georgia, Oklahoma. That's not a poor showing. Losing doesn't equal poor showing. Poor showing is you get your butt kicked like Urban Meyer did in 2016 against Clemson. Would you agree with that?
Yep, get whipped. Yep.
Looking like you did against Michigan. So you can now argue that you're like in your 4 big games since you beat Clemson, you've gotten smacked. And I don't think the game against Utah last year in the Rose Bowl was a very good showing. That was a depleted, beat-up Utah team, and they still almost beat you.
Yeah.
Like their running back would go score a touchdown and then go play corner on the very next series, right? I mean, that was not a good showing. And his team has – and even the Penn State game this year where they won, that was not a good showing. They did not look good. And so we kept thinking, no, they're just waiting on the Michigan game. They're just overlooking everything. They're just so keyed in on Michigan. And then they get to the Michigan game, and it's like, nope, that's just who they were. That's just who they were. An uninspired football team that doesn't maximize its talent. That's what they've been. He needs them to come out against Georgia and play very well. Even if it's a loss, it's got to be they were just better than us, but our kids played their butts off and were really close. Mm-hmm. If it's not, then you got to ask yourself, you've been recruiting top classes every year. Yep. Every year, Ohio State has top classes. And if they're going out there and you're saying in your last 4 games against big-time opponents, because have they played anybody in between them that's would be considered a big-time opponent? They're not. Notre Dame, so. Okay, you had a good one over Notre Dame. We'll say that. Okay, but other than that, for the most part, you've got your butt kicked in every big game, and you're a team that has been a top 3 recruiting class almost every year. Your 22 class was ranked 4th. Your 21 class is ranked 2nd. Your 2020 class is ranked 5th. Your 2019 class was ranked – where was that one ranked? Oh, that was a really small class. They only signed 17 kids. They ranked 14th, but they were way up there in star ranking. They were like in the top 3 or 4 in like average star ranking. It's like you're recruiting top 5 classes every year, and you're getting your butt kicked by those other top programs. And Michigan, who has not been recruiting well recently.
At all.
I think then all of a sudden his seat starts warming up from the people that matter.
Right.
But it's not right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with that, Brian. And I would say this. It's a tough matchup against Georgia. It is. Georgia's a really talented team, obviously. But, I mean, is there a question that who the second most talented team in the playoffs is this year? Just from a pure talent level perspective? Like Ohio State, I mean, is easily, right? Like it's not even close.
Easily second?
Easily second, yeah.
Ryan, I could make a case. I could make a better case first. That they're number 1 than they're 3rd.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying I would definitely say that. Mm-hmm. But look, who has the more talented quarterback?
Yeah.
Who has the most talented running back on the field? I would argue Ohio State. Who has the more talented wide receivers? Who has the offensive tackles that are going to get drafted the highest?
Yeah,
right?
you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Now, Georgia has one defensive lineman that's going to get drafted super high, but I would argue if we're talking about where each guy's going to get drafted, I would argue that Ohio State has the next 3 highest ranked draft picks on the D line. They're not all going to be this year because some of them aren't eligible, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Yep.
Secondary, that's where Georgia, I think, has an edge. But other than that, I mean, are there a lot of positions, Ryan, linebacker and secondary, that you would say Georgia has more talent than Ohio State right now?
Mm-hmm.
I say right now, Georgia's a way better coached football team. That's what Georgia's right now.
I mean, and you've seen that against Michigan the last 2 years, right? Michigan was the better coached football team. Was Michigan more talented than Ohio State? Absolutely not. If we're being, again, you can do the same thing you just did with Georgia, right? I mean, who has the more talented quarterback? Who's had the more talented receivers? Who has the better well, maybe not better offensive line because Michigan's plays is a better unit than Ohio State, but who has the more God-given talent?
Ohio State will have at least 2 kids from their line get drafted higher than probably anybody that Michigan has.
Oh, no doubt.
Right?
No doubt. Yeah.
I mean, Paris Johnson's probably going to be a top 10 to 15 pick from what I'm seeing, right, Ryan, in this upcoming draft?
He's definitely going to be a first-round pick.
I'm seeing people put DeJuan Jones in the first round of mock drafts. Yeah. Now, I think that's a little nuts, but, you know.
I think he's more of a top 50 to 75 type of guy.
But still, I mean, who's the highest? Who the center and Zach Zinter probably 2 highest.
Zinter probably goes before Olu just because of size and all that stuff.
But is Ryan Harris going to be a top 50 pick? I don't see that.
No,
do you?
No, not at all. He's a day 3 player. Yeah. Yep.
So there you go. It's just they're coached better and they're more physical.
Yep.
That's the difference.
And even after losing guys like Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo, they're still able to get enough out of guys like Mike Morris, for instance, right? And the Mozzie Smiths of the world. That's
because last year with those 2 kids plus Dax Hill, you could argue that Michigan had enough high-end talent that you could say, okay, they matched up well against Ohio State because of those high-end players. Those guys are all gone, and they were not replaced by similar players. It's not like Ohio State losing Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and replacing them with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, right? That's like great player leaves, great player steps in. There's a big drop-off in God-given ability between David Ajabo and Hayden Hutchinson and the guys that replaced them this year. Yeah. Same with Dax Hill. Didn't Dax Hill get replaced by a converted receiver? No, he didn't play that position. He played corner. But, yeah, I mean, it was not the same kind of talent, right?
Yeah.
And that's my point. They're coached incredibly well. They play hard. They play physical. They play focused. They're fundamentally sound. Ohio State is none of those things. They were all talent this year, all talent.
Yep.
And you start to get because now you're so far. There's no more Urban Meyer influence left in your program, and you have to ask yourself: is that part of the problem? Now, a win or a really close game that goes toe to toe, I think eliminates a lot of that, Ryan. I think it does. Or at least it quiets it for now until next year when they're going to have a couple big games next year, Ryan. Yes. They play at Notre Dame and at Michigan next year. Ohio State does.
I mean, they have to beat Michigan next year. Like, you have to. Can you imagine if they lose 3 straight to Michigan, man? Imagine
if they lose both.
Oh, man.
It's not out of the realm of possibility.
It's not.
It's not.
Because you're going to – I mean, that's the other thing about Ohio State is, yes, there's talent everywhere, right? So you're going to reload to a degree, but – you're losing a lot this year, man. I mean, CJ Stroud, you're losing the 2 offensive tackles you talked about. You're losing Zach Harrison, who's had a solid year. You're maybe losing Tommy Eichenberg. You're going to lose maybe a safety or 2. Like, there's a lot of guys. Luke Whippler might declare early at center. Like, you might have to replace 4 or 5 offensive linemen next year, which is just insane to think about.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, but we'll see. We shall see.
That's another reason I'm looking for signing today be over so I can have my phone on silent so I don't miss calls, important calls. All right. John Erickson asks, can the lack of rotation in the offensive line this year possibly lead to problems next year? I don't think so, John. I mean, look, is it ideal? Heck no. They didn't have enough blowouts to get kids into games this year. That's a problem. But it's not a problem to the degree like when Quentin Nelson stepped into the lineup in 2015, he'd never played a snap of college football. He was pretty good game 1, guys had, we've seen this a lot, right? Robert Hainsey steps in and is a pretty good football player. Tommy Kramer, those 2 kids step in and handle right tackle on a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at 17. Those kids combined for 0 college snaps coming into that, right? If the players are talented enough, they'll be okay. The other thing that helps them too, John, is they're going to be flanked on both sides by experienced guys.
Yes.
Zeke at center and then the tackle. So no matter who's at guard, that's that's going to be part of it. And they're going to have all season to battle. I think the only thing that could create a problem is if nobody seizes hold of the job very early. Like if we're going into the final week of camp and nobody seized hold, that's a problem. But I don't think that's going to be because they didn't get enough playing time this year.
I mean, and I would say this too, Brian. I mean, you made the point already, but you're returning 3 starters next year. And if I can tell you you're going to return 3 starters, having both your tackles and your center back is a pretty nice spot to be in, right? So it's not like I just mentioned Ohio State's going to be replacing 4 out of 5 starters next year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Notre Dame's going to be replacing 2 out of 5. So it's not a bad place to be in just naturally from a numbers perspective. And again, having both tackles and your center back, there's worse places you could be in, to say the least.
Absolutely. Along that same lines, Ryan, Tom Burke says, we know that Stan likes using tackles at guard. Why isn't Tosh Baker considered a potential guard for next year?
He's too tall, man.
Well, the counter would be he's not that much taller than Josh Lugg. The difference is Baker plays higher than Josh, and he's he's got a longer frame, and he doesn't have the power profile that Josh shows.
I was going to say he's a little more finesse of a football player.
He's a pass blocker.
He's a tackle. He's a tackle.
Now, it's kind of like what we said, Ryan. If Tosh Baker is clearly one of your 4 or 5 best offensive linemen, then you need to have a serious conversation with Blake Fisher about moving inside. Where I think Blake Fisher has the tools to be a top 10 draft pick at guard or tackle.
Agreed.
He may not believe that, but I think that's the case. I think that's the conversation you need to have. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. I mean, Tosh is a junior now, going to senior year. I don't know if he's going to make that type of a jump. I hope he does because he's very talented. But I think that would have to be the conversation more so than moving him to guard. Ryan, if he was 3 inches shorter, my answer doesn't change.
Yeah. Just not.
I just don't think he fits that power profile you want at guard.
How players fit into certain spots comes down to play style and temperament a lot too, right? Like Tosh is a kid that wins off of movement, wins off of length, and that's not really a fit inside. Like Blake Fisher would be a much more natural fit inside a guard than a Tosh Baker would. Tosh Baker's a tackle. Nothing wrong with that. It just is what he is. So I just don't think there's anything about him that screams guard to me.
All right. Last couple questions we get out of here. Cole Barker says, any shows on the All-American Bowls? When we get closer to them, we will. I mean, they're both after the bowl game, the Notre Dame bowl game. So we're a ways away from there. We will have stuff on those. Right now, the plan is for us to be there. Ryan will be at the Under Armour game. I'm going to right now be at the Army game. I'm sorry. I'm going to always call it the Army game. So we'll have shows on those as we get closer. But right now, I mean, our recruiting shows next week are going to be geared towards the end of this week, and next week are going to be geared towards signing day. We'll get into the other stuff afterwards. Beefeater says he caught some flack for this, but I think it's a fair question. We just got to put a context to it. He says, what are the odds Bowers gets drafted before Mayer? And obviously 0 this year because he's not coming out. But I do think it's fair to ask the question about next year because to me, Ryan, is there a chance that he gets drafted before Mayer? Yeah, because we don't know what the draft order will be and we don't know what teams' needs will be. But just because a guy gets drafted higher doesn't mean he was better because there's discussion of how deep is a draft class compared to another, how much better is he than everyone else in a draft class, which creates a greater need where maybe a guy gets overdrafted because if you don't take him, there's not a day 1 or day 2 guy left on the board. So there's a lot of those things that go into it. But Ryan, what would you say to the potential that Brock Bowers gets drafted before Michael Mayer when his time comes in the draft?
Assuming that both are healthy, just judging based upon how the NFL tends to evaluate the position, I honestly think that Brock Bowers probably goes higher than Michael Mayer. I value much more the all-around game that Michael Mayer brings because I do think he's a better all-around football player when you bring everything into the equation. But the matter of fact about Brock Bowers is he's going to go to the combine and he is going to run incredibly fast. He's going to jump incredibly high. He's going to test at an all-time level probably. And teams are going to lose their minds over that type of player. I think it's like a Kyle Pitts. Like if we were comparing Kyle Pitts to Michael Mayer for a second, right? I still think Michael Mayer is a better all-around football player than Kyle Pitts, but Kyle Pitts is a higher upside as being a a high volume receiver as far as the impact he can have as being a vertically oriented receiver in the passing game. And he has better athletic traits from a just speed perspective, right? And a twitchiness perspective. So ultimately, I think that Brock Bowers will be valued a little higher by the NFL because we see it every single year, right or wrong. The NFL values speed, and Brock Bowers certainly has a lot of speed to his game. There's no doubt.
Yeah. So, yes, I think that's a good answer, Ryan. Very good answer. Very good answer.
Someone just said ESPN said Brock Bowers blocks like an offensive lineman. Yeah, right.
Somebody said that when they did their ESPN All-American team, and I don't know if this is true or not because I did not see that ESPN even came out with an All-American team yet. They said something about they said he's the most complete tight end. Actually, hold on. It was actually put out earlier today. I think they had Brock Bowers at tight end. Let me see here. Yeah, they had him at tight end. And let's see here. He says Bowers gets the nod as the country's most complete player at the position. Here's what he says. This is what this guy said. This is the biggest joke I've ever heard from ESPN. I can't believe that. It's worse than I thought. He's a big play threat in the pass game, runs great routes, blocks like an offensive lineman, and can make defenders miss after the catch when the Dogs hand the ball off to him. That is one of the most absurd things I have ever heard in my entire – are you watching games? Do you watch football at that point in time? Brock Bowers blocks like an offensive lineman? What, when he's blocking nickel corners in space?
I was about to say he's a really good stalk blocker, but he doesn't block in line ever.
What are you freaking talking about? That is the dumbest thing. Oh, my gosh, dude. That is so bad. They're not even trying to hide their absurdity at this point.
They're not.
They're not even trying to hide that.
Well, Brian, there was that one game earlier in the season, which it probably led to this hyperbole where Brock, I think, took a defensive back and put him through the end zone, and everyone just lost their minds. I'm like, guys, he's blocking a kid that's 60 pounds lighter than him. I mean,
that's the stupidest thing I've ever read in my entire life. That is just terrible.
Yes.
Christopher Crosby said ESPN said Bowers blocks like an offensive lineman. I thought he was joking. I thought he's being hyperbolic.
I thought he was too.
ESPN says he leaps over tall buildings. He's just being hyperbolic. They were being serious.
Faster than a speeding boat.
That Brock Bowers is the most complete tight end in college football, and that he blocks like an offensive. That is a horrible offensive lineman if he blocks like an offensive lineman. He blocks like that Brian Driscoll dude at Cal. Seriously, remember that dude that you kept making fun of, the kid with my name?
He's played center now.
You're like, he's freaking terrible. He can't block anybody. If you're talking about that kind of offensive lineman, sure.
Man, that was before I even knew what his name was. I was just like, wow, 60 is awful for Cal.
That was the dumbest thing I've ever read in my entire life, dude. That was terrible. Terrible. Oh, my gosh. That is bad. That is really, really bad. That was awful.
New all-timer for ESPN right there, man. Love it.
That was terrible. I can't even take that seriously. I can't even take that seriously. That's so bad. Anyway.
I'm glad I don't read ESPN for those reasons.
I didn't read it. I didn't even know they came out with an All-American list. I hadn't even seen anybody talking about it. And then, so I was like, well, hold on a second. Let me just go check this out. And so, that's really bad. Yeah, maybe they meant a JV high school offensive line. I mean, he got better as a blocker this year, but, dude, he is so far away from being a good blocker. Come on, man. It's terrible. And he rarely blocks big guys.
I know, man.
So stupid.
It's really stupid.
So stupid. Anyway, that's how we're ending our show today, is that nonsense from ESPN. So anyway, I enjoyed the show up until that point in time, Ryan, very much. So I want to thank you for being with me today. Thank everybody for joining us today. Before you leave, everybody, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, sign up for the CFB Nation channel on not just YouTube, but also on the CFB Nation podcast app, which you can find it, and sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Tonight, 6 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk, and then Ryan and I will be back tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit about the defense and what we kind of want to see from the Notre Dame defense heading into the bowl game. So until then, have a great rest of your day. Enjoy tonight's show at 6 o'clock, IB Nation Sports Talk, and we'll see you guys again very soon, guys and gals, very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.